It is now 6:30. We're calling to order the Trophy Club Municipal Utility District 1 regular meeting. It is, as I mentioned, 6:30. All directors are here. Vice President Rose, Secretary Treasurer Flynn, Director Chatham, and Director Castaway, and myself. We're going to go into the session, call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. So citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to address the board on any matter, whether or not it's posted on the agenda. The board is not permitted to take action on or discuss any presentation made to the board at this time concerning an item not listed on the agenda. The board will hear presentations on specific agenda items prior to the board addressing those items. You may speak up to 3 minutes or the time limit determined by the president or presiding officer. Are there any citizen comments?
No.
Okay. We'll move into the consent agenda. Excuse me. All matters listed as consent agenda are considered to be routine by the board of directors and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is desired, then that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Number one, consider and take appropriate action to approve the consent agenda. A, May 2018 check register. B, May 15, 2018 regular meeting minutes. C, June 7, 2018 special meeting minutes. Are there any items that any director requests be removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for consent agenda. Vice President Rose.
I move to approve the consent agenda with item B being the minutes as amended at the dais.
Okay, I have a motion from Vice President Rose to approve the consent agenda with item B, the May 15th regular meeting minutes that were modified at the dais. Do I have a second? I'll second. It was seconded by Director Chatham. Any comments? Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes unanimously. We'll now enter our regular session. Consider and take appropriate action to appoint an alternate member of the Wastewater Customer Advisory Committee for the City of Fort Worth. Staff?
I recommend our primary representative to the Wholesale Customer Advisory Committee is Mike McMahon. I think our alternate needs to be Stephen Krolchek, as he's our financial manager, and this represents one of the largest expenditures, contractual expenditures, that the district makes on an annual basis.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion. I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sir?
I am going to move that we approve the primary member to the Wholesale Consumer Advisory Committee for City of Fort Worth to be Mike McMahon, and that the alternate member to the Wholesale Consumer Advisory Committee for the City of Fort Worth to be Stephen Krolchek.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice President Rose to appoint Mike McMahon to be the primary member to the Wholesale Customer Advisory Committee and Stephen Krolchek to be the alternate. Do we have a second?
I second.
That's seconded by Director Castaway. Any comments?
I have a question.
Director, Vice President Rose?
We're agended for alternate member.
It's only the alternate.
Alternate.
Only the alternate.
Right.
Okay.
Are you?
I'm already on it.
You already
I know
primary?
you're on it, but are you listed as a primary? Do you remember?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
You want to
Then
revise
I'd
that?
like to revise my, I'd like to withdraw my motion, if the second
Okay.
will agree.
The second, do you agree to allow? Okay.
Okay, I move to appoint Stephen Krolchek as the alternate member to the Wholesale Consumer Advisory Committee for the City of Fort Worth.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice President Rose to appoint Stephen Krochek as an alternate member to the Wholesale Customer Advisor Committee for the City of Fort Worth.
And I second.
That was seconded by Director Castaway. Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Item number 3, consider and take appropriate action to appoint 2 directors to serve on the rate committee to work with staff to review and develop recommendations regarding water and sewer rates for fiscal year 2019. Staff?
This was a matter discussed before. Traditionally, we have appointed 2 directors to serve as a rate subcommittee to look at both the draft budget, because it's a chicken and an egg thing, maybe that's the right way to say it, and then look at the rates that would be coming forward to cover both the O&M expenses and the debt service obligations of the district. On both the tax side, I mean, there's presumptions about the tax revenue that go into that, as well as what rate changes need to be made to establish revenue sufficiency for the district. We have heard that not everybody believes we need a rate committee. I think we heard that in our work session. So we are trying to establish a rate committee per our historical practice. I guess that's really what the staff has to say.
Well, I would say I was on the rate committee last year, and I know at that time, I think it was absolutely mandatory because, actually time before last, because we were considering a couple different mechanisms or ways to do rates. I think the previous board had gotten comfortable with our previous way of doing rates, i.e. weighted average, a incline block weighted average for, not weighted, well, winter average. And so if we're going to maintain that approach, then the number of scenarios that we would look at would likely not be a great deal of scenarios. I think part of it when it comes to the education, my first time being on the board, I found that extremely valuable because you can ask a ton of questions that, frankly, if you ask during a session like this, would take a while. And so I did find value in having a committee to do it. And one of the other things we did is pretty much all of the scenarios were presented to the board. So the board really didn't lose anything. It just gave 2 members to get very, very familiar with the process, the rate scenarios, and I frankly found that it took me pretty much every one of those meetings to truly understand some of those concepts. And so as we go through and consider whether or not we want to assign people to a rate study committee, in order to really understand it, it takes a lot of time, and there'll likely be a lot of questions, and I don't know if you're gonna get comfortable trying to do that in a general session. So just something for people to consider, even though we likely will have significantly fewer scenarios than we previously had. Any other discussion? Vice President Rhodes?
I prefer not to go with the committee direction because I think it leaves a majority of the board out of the discussion loop, and there may be points or questions that come up in a small committee group that they might have wished to have had addressed or they might not think of until they are exposed to it. And I frankly fail to see a significant time difference between what we would spend as a board or as in a committee plus a board. Probably would, I would think if we do it as a committee and as a board, for at least 2 people, whoever are on the committee, are going to spend more time, and you'll have less overall general knowledge. Going that route, I think, is the president's expressed that unless there was to be a presentation to modify the type of rate structure that we use, that there is probably not a large change or delta that would be required, if we stay with our current structure system, be able to answer more questions and get involved in that structure better as a group. And so I really don't like the committee, going to a committee structure on this.
I have a question. What type of time commitment, Carmen, if we were to talk about this, would these people be looking at in your estimation?
Honestly, I can't say because I was not here during that period of time. I do have a lot of experience in rate making over time. So I think this, actually, if we're going to go a different direction, before Bill and Greg came on the board, we always had a finance committee and had a rate committee, and I think that actually parallels the town in some ways. So the town has those subcommittees as well, as I understand it. Now that the town has moved away, maybe we don't need to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, and I'm okay with changing our direction. We're going to get into scheduling items when we get back to future agenda items and future meeting dates. We've talked about a budget workshop, so is that a separate date, or is that, do we maybe change the time of our regular meeting to, I want to be sensitive because only a couple of you are actually retired, the rest of you are working. And so if we're calling a meeting like today at 4 o'clock, somebody's taking time off without getting paid. And I want to be sensitive to that. I think it's important. We could contemplate for a couple months setting our regular meeting at, say, 7 and doing a workshop at 5:30 or 6 to handle budget, to handle rates, but do it as a workshop so it's more educational and you have a chance to, but there's no action items taken, right? So as I understand the Open Government Meetings Act rules, we can establish that. Just say that there's not going to be any action taken, but we're going to have presentations from our rate advisor. In terms of rates, I firmly believe we should always have an outside rate consultant with a liability policy, so if they screw something up, we have something to go against. But I do appreciate our ability as a staff, and Stephen and I now have a copy of the model from our rate advisor, so it's got some pieces built into it, like things like our 5-year CIP, which we're trying to build right now so we can present it to you. But my view is that we should always give the board like a 5-year view of here's what it looks like for the rate increases over the next 5 years. Is it our estimate of the budget 5 years from now a swag? It probably is. But, if you were looking at 24% next year and 2% the year after, it seems like a policy decision that the board could say, well, we're going to smooth that out, and we're going to try to create a lower rate shock for our customers as a part of that process. So, I'm on board with whatever the board would like to do. We need to find an interface for that, whether it's a separate sort of budget meeting that talks about budget and rates, the chicken and egg or bass-backwards approach, whatever you want to talk about. I'm okay with that, but it would be a divergence from our past practice.
I would say, having been on the rate committee, I would say it was probably 6 hours. We had 2 meetings that were about 3 hours apiece outside of the board. And then and we would get rid of the scenarios that didn't fit with the board's approach to rate making. And then normally there'd be 3 or 4 scenarios presented. So it was probably 6 hours outside of meeting with the board. And so it wasn't an insignificant amount of time. And the one thing that was 2 people asking questions. If you suddenly had 5 people asking questions, that time could balloon significantly.
Well, I guess that's the point. To Bill's point, that if these issues are all discussed in a regular board meeting, that's going to be lengthy. I guess I'm not opposed to subcommittees in general, as a general practice to go through the minutia of discussing an item, flushing out issues. Let's get rid of that. Let's bring forth the things to discuss. In concept, I'm fine with that. Later, we're going to talk, I'm going to propose, it's on the agenda, about a work session. And what I had in my mind was budget specifically. So I guess I'll hold off on that because I think we do need a big discussion about budget for, especially for us newbies. So I'm not opposed, Bill, to what you're saying. Maybe we don't have one need here at the subcommittee if in fact we're gonna be having a larger discussion, you know, offsite or work session or something.
But I would tell you, this is different from the budget. This is the rate study is a very separate exercise from the budget conversation. So you have to view those as different, because the budget becomes a component of the rate setting process. So they're not the same.
Okay.
And,
No. I'm fine.
yeah. And so I would say for me, I'm not opposed to keeping, on the budget side, I'm okay with not doing the, well, we've never done one for the budget. It's always been something that's presented to the board, but I actually like the idea of keeping the rate committee in place because you cut out a lot of the stuff that's just out in the weeds. And so I'm not opposed to doing that. But you three are kind of the new, so.
Well, I guess
Any
my
discussion on-
my last thought would be, if there was two people, it would seem to make sense to have a veteran, so to speak, someone who's been through the process and maybe can bring that knowledge forward along with staff, and somebody that's maybe new, as opposed to two new or two, you know,
I'd say
just as a recommendation.
make a motion.
Well, I'll make a motion that we do go ahead with the rate committee. I'm not sure who the second person would be, but I'd like to nominate my friend over here, Mr. Mark, if he's willing to be on that committee.
Are you open to that?
Actually, I'm not real fond of extra meetings and extra committees and that stuff. I'm more on the line of Mr. Rose there as far as, if we're going to only have a few scenarios, I don't see why the entire board doesn't have it. So taking it off on a subcommittee goose chase.
Well, I first thought Bill should take it as well, but obviously you're against it and you don't want it. So I think Director Flynn and President Wilson would make a good subcommittee.
I'm willing to do it if you're willing to do it.
Are you interested in doing it, Ms. Kelly?
No, I'm not.
You're not
I can't take anything else on.
No, neither can I, but I would do it, if nothing else, just because of the educational piece of it. To me, that's valuable to do it.
Okay, then I'll make a motion that myself and Secretary Treasurer Flynn be appointed to the rate committee for fiscal year 2019 to develop recommendation for water and sewer rates. Do I have a second?
I second.
The motion was seconded by Director Castaway. Any discussion? Director Rose?
I will be opposed because I think it deprives the board of an education.
Thank you, Vice President Rose. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by raising your right hand or your hand. Director Castaway and Secretary Treasurer Flynn, all opposed. Vice President Rose and Director Chatham, motion passes. Chapman. What did I say?
You keep saying Chatman, it sounds like.
Okay. Yeah, Chatham, okay.
Chatham.
I'll try to,
Trying to make me Brit.
what, say with an accent, oui.
Yes.
No, yes, okay.
Yes, Governor.
Okay, we have item number 4, consider and take appropriate action regarding adoption of resolution number 2018-0618A, authorizing the general manager to approve construction contracts change orders. Staff?
President Wilson, this one has been discussed and gone back and forth a few times. It was last in front of our board, really in the last meeting of our previous board, who tabled it for our new board's consideration. I think we've gone back and forth with our attorney and the now president of our board on trying to put something in place that allows the staff flexibility to approve change orders and not have to call a special session just to approve a change order in short term. So there are a lot of cases where that comes up. For example, there was a change order that was approved just recently by the engineer and the general manager that only changed the number of days associated with a contract. So it didn't have a monetary component to it, but it was something that we asked to have done. It changed the number of days associated with the contract by, I think, 3 days. They're 220 days behind schedule. So, but it did add 3 days to the contract amount of time. I think the staff ought to have the authority to do those kind of changes. The other example happened on Phoenix Drive, where we issued a contract to a competent contractor and a part of our joint project with the town. When they dug up the street, they found that all of the connections on one side of the street, so the main tends to be in someone's front yard, the services on the other side of the street have to come across from the main. Well, in that case, they had dual services coming off of one service line, which is not really our standard, but when that particular subdivision was installed, they ran one small diameter line across the road and put 2 meter boxes on the same line. So in the middle of that, we had a budgeted contingency, and based on recommendations from our water superintendent, I said, yeah, let's get this done. We need to move forward and replace those individual lines serving 2 lots with 1 line per lot. It's just kind of a standard thing, and it was a budgeted contingency. I think we ended up bringing that back, didn't we, Mike? We asked for, it was after the fact approval of that change order, but our hope is to get a change order approval process in place by policy that at least gives us the flexibility that we used to have. So as long as there was a budgeted contingency in the past, the staff was able to make decisions and move the project forward without calling a special board meeting. And it's our hope that what you have in front of you tonight will get us close to where we used to be.
Okay, I helped work with the attorney to draft this. To me, the nuts and bolts of this essentially says, so step back a second, when we approve something, it will be for a total amount, and then there's typically a contingency within the total amount approved. So what this does is authorizes the general manager to approve a change order that is either $50,000, 10% of the total contract, or the contingency, whichever's less. And so, for example, there would never be an instance where the general manager would approve something that if the contract was for $1 million, he couldn't approve something that went to $1 million and a penny. If the contingency was $40,000, even though it's 50, he could not approve anything that exceeded the $40,000 contingency. It would also have to be recommended by the engineer. All of our projects will have a engineer that is kind of overseeing the work, so they would have to recommend that this is something that we should do. And then there's also a provision that you can't structure or de-aggregate, i.e. you can't do, if there are 3 or 4 things, if it go over the whatever that $50,000 or 40, if that's the contingency, you can't ever break something up to go over that amount. So it's the aggregate of. And you can extend the time for weather-related extensions. Again, that would have to be recommended for approval by the project engineer.
Just real quickly, I think this gets back to one of those issues we talked about in the orientation session about kind of what is this board's desire in terms of decisions at the board level versus delegation to staff. And there's trade-offs there in terms of efficiencies and conducting district business and cost of special meetings. In terms of the legal requirements, just so the board can differentiate the legal restrictions versus the policy restrictions, by law, you cannot delegate to your GM the authority to approve a change order in excess of $50,000. There's a number of other limitations in this order, and those are more policies by the board, as Greg described, to further provide a level of comfort to the board. But I want you to be aware of what the law requires or limits in terms of delegation to your general manager versus additional restrictions more from a policy perspective.
And one other thing, the general manager is also required to report any change orders that have been approved at the next meeting. So they have to explicitly identify those at the next scheduled meeting. So the board always maintains insight.
So that was gonna be my question, is what's the checks and balances, not for a single line item, I get that, but to one of your points about in aggregate, it can't go over the 50,000, so you couldn't do a 25, a 25, a 25, for example. What's the mechanism for the checks and balances? And if it's bringing it before the board, then
Yeah.
then I get that.
Yeah, it has to review it. So that's one of the ways that we always keep insight into this. Now, granted, this was something that the previous board discussed, and so if there's something in here that this was negotiated consistent with what we discussed, if you have some different thoughts, we'd love to hear it.
Well, I'm kind of assuming that staff, including our general manager and that stuff, are competent. I mean, that's why we have them on contract. I am definitely do not like micromanagement. I figure that they're perfectly capable of doing their jobs day in, day out, and reporting to us with the checks and balances I see in this. I think it's perfectly valid to let him do the day-to-day stuff. We should not be putting our fingers in that kind of stuff.
Any other discussion? Vice President Rose?
I do have a question. It's on page 19 of the packet. Item B, 2B.
2B?
2B or not to be. It states the general manager may only approve change orders in an amount that when aggregated with all other change orders approved by the general manager does not exceed $50,000. That's not clear to me. I mean, that's nebulous. Is that $50,000 a fiscal year, $50,000 what all the projects has going on? Exactly what do we have here?
My response to that would be this relates to change orders under a single contract, but by definition, that's what we're talking about. This is restrictive. Again, this goes way beyond what the law does. The law limits it to 50,000 to a change order. But the result of this limitation is that your general manager approves 3 or 4 or 5 change orders on a contract for incidental matters, and those will accumulate over time. And the next change order may only be $600, but he may not be in a position to approve it. Legally, that restriction doesn't exist, but this was a limitation by policy to really make sure that there's a cumulative limit. So it's a policy one. But to answer your question, Bill, this entire order is intended to relate to change orders under a contract.
Okay, well, it says, 2 says approve change orders to contracts. It's plural.
I'm sorry?
2
2B?
above, 2, we're looking at 2B, but go up to 2, the basic sentence,
Yeah.
which A and B relate to. It says orders to contracts, plural. So that's the reason for my question. If we're saying that he can only, if it's limited to $50,000 per contract.
If the board thinks it's necessary to further clarify that all of the limitations relate to an individual contract, we can certainly make that clarification.
what my thought process was, why does it, if we restrict it above to the items which are mentioned, those items mentioned in A, why is B necessary?
I would just chime in and say the nature of capital projects is not tied to a fiscal year. For example, we started our security project to upgrade the badges and other things in this building with a $60,000 sort of budget, or maybe it was 40, I forget which, it was 57 maybe. But it started in last fiscal year, went into this fiscal year. So once the budget is created for that, it's not tied to an annual budget.
But the reason for my point is that, to me, as I look at this, B is unnecessary and it's confusing.
I would disagree with you, Vice
Okay.
President Rose.
Okay.
Up in the second bullet, this states may grant a official employee responsible for administering a contract to approve a change order that involves an increase or a decrease of less than $50,000. So there it states that it's a contract. 2B is important because that specifically calls out that you can't de-aggregate an item or have your approval be multiple, because without that statement, then you could view 2A and say, okay, well, this change order was for $50,000. Now I'm going to approve another change order, and that's for $30,000. That would be legal or would not violate this document if you didn't have B. Because B is what tells you you can't aggregate them to exceed $50,000.
In my mind,
That was added.
to be, it all comes back to what the board's intention is in terms of the scope of the authority they want to delegate to your general manager. If you want to state that in any individual instance, he can approve up to $50,000 for any specific change order, and the other terms in A. That's one thing. The other is to say, we want to go beyond that, and we want to limit the cumulative amount of change orders in any contract. And if that's your desire, that would be B. So B, in my mind, is a further limitation on the GM's change order that is not legally required. It's whether you want to oppose an additional limitation on the authority granted under A.
But that, just to clarify, that's only for that change order, correct? We're not talking about having a limit of $50,000 period for all change order or all contracts that are out there. And let's say you have 15 contracts that are out there.
Per contract.
Yeah, it's per
Okay,
contract.
that's fine, okay.
Then I think it needs to state that.
Then I agree with Director Rose. I think that statement in number 2 should be amended to say to a contract instead of 2 contracts.
And that's an easy change to make, and we're happy to do that. I think that we do need direction from the board, though, whether the desire is to establish the $50,000 per change order or a cumulative 50, and that's just a policy decision for the board.
I know for me, I would say 50 because, you take the wastewater treatment plant, you could approve, there are 3, 4, 5 change orders a month. And over a project that went 2 or 3 years, you could get up to a couple of $1 million if you just said 50,000 per. So for me, my comfort level is 50,000 per
Per
contract.
contract.
The drawback to that, though, just the flip side, and I don't disagree, is that first change order may be $50,000 that you do in month number 2. That means your GM can no longer approve a change order for the next 24 months.
He's done. Yeah.
That's the flip side of that.
I believe the contingency budget on the wastewater plant was on the order of $250,000, $300,000 originally, most of which was eaten during the platting process, as I understand it. So that was an unexpected expense that went to both engineering and real estate matters.
Conceptually, speaking conceptually, I don't have a problem allowing the GM latitude up to the contingency which is built into the contract. Conceptually, I don't. The rewording of B to make it, if the general manager may only approve cumulative change orders in amount when aggregated with all other change orders in a contract. that, like you say, you work on a multi-year project, 2-3 year project, where you had $250,000-$300,000, that's a pretty tough set of handcuffs that you throw out there.
I guess for me, we only have one wastewater treatment plant. And so I think to use the biggest piece of infrastructure we have as a basis to make a decision, we aren't gonna have another one of those at least I think 30, 40 years down the line. So I think to base a decision on that I wouldn't be comfortable with that.
Okay, so we're getting ready to build a water line to a plant that's roughly $5 million, $5 million. 10% is $400 or $500,000
Yep.
of contingency. And we limit it to $50,000, period. And so under this, to me, that's too restrictive. I think that you get a one-time.
There should also be a way for us to release that cap. There's no provision in here that we can say, okay, there's an exception. He's got to be allowed to, you know what I'm saying? So there should be a way for us to give him a provisional, okay, we know this is a special circumstance. You're released from this $50,000 restriction.
Well, by doing it as a dollar amount, gets difficult to build, to your point, on a $5 million project, that's not a whole lot of money. On a $100,000 project, that's a whole lot of money. So is there a better way to look at it from a percentage standpoint, or is that getting too complicated?
Well, we have to leave the 50K in because that's a law. So one particular change order can't exceed 50K, one person can't do it. So really, the only choice here is to say, we could modify this to say 50,000 per change order, or 10% of the original contract price. And then that would give him the flexibility to go up to, he could spend the entire contingency, whatever that number is.
Could we change item B to say, instead of the $50,000, to say to the contingency approved, instead of the 50,000? Would that make more sense?
I think A already takes care of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think at that point, if we did not want to limit it to $50,000, then to Vice President Rowe's point, you would just strike B. And then that would be limiting him to 50,000, the 10% of the contract price, or the contingency.
And I can see that.
And you could further reduce it if you want to get rid of the percentage of the contract price. You could further reduce, you could even remove more restrictions.
Mr. President, could I just add a kind of a tangential piece of clarification? So if you look at item number 7 on your agenda tonight, it's change order 15 on the wastewater treatment plant improvements. I'm here to confess that, in fact, that work was done over a month ago. That's the reality. In this particular case, the contractor was charged with doing some demolition work on an electrical panel. When they laid it down, they broke part of an existing line that was going to be reused for power. And this came from the old generator into the system. So the engineer and the contractor went through a pretty extensive negotiation process where they came to the conclusion that, hey, this is like $75,000, $80,000 worth of work. 60 of that's on the contractor for screwing up the demolition process. But part of it was also on us for having a wire that was not rated for that industrial application in the first place. So this work was done a month ago. We're bringing it back for approval, but it's in a post sort of state. The work was done to get this online. It had to be done. So in a timely fashion, part of this is a process where in the contract with Weber Cadagua and CPNY, and they say, well, how do we value a change order, right? You're coming to us and saying it costs $3,000 to paint a handicap sticker in a parking stall. And we're looking at the RS means, which they agreed to. It's a standard contractor document for how you estimate the cost of a project. And the engineer's saying, no, we're gonna go by this methodology. So they've been hammering this out for 2 months now, or a month and a half at least, since we did this power changeover. And we're now bringing it back because we've got it signed by both the engineer and the contractor. It happened today, actually. We got the signed document. I think Lori's gonna tell us that the number has changed, from what we show on the agenda. I think we went down to 25, if I'm not, 25 and change. But nonetheless, this is after the fact. The work was done, it had to move on. They just hadn't agreed to the price yet. So that kind of is another dimension of, we're really kind of struggling with this to make sure that you all have fiduciary reins in your hands, but allowing us as staff to execute our projects without dragging you in for, a $2,000 item.
So I understand Bill's point about eliminating B. I got that. So if you just go back to A, then, am I reading it correctly that the individual change order that exceeds the lesser of the following, 50,000, and then the others? So if you have a $6 million project, his limit would only be 50,000, would it not?
Per change order.
It would, and that would be mandated by law.
And so ideally, if there were multiple change orders,
Right.
then he could approve up to $600,000.
$600,000,
And
okay.
the piece that you have to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
comfortable with is, if you were called to task on how was $600,000 spent, would you be comfortable saying, I trusted the GM to do it, and so I did it? That's really the decision that each one of us is faced with.
Okay, this may be pulling it back again, but I read A as for an individual. It says individual change order, where B is saying an aggregate. So they are two separate little things.
Absolutely.
And what I'm saying, if the aggregate, instead of saying $50,000 max for the aggregate, if we say the max for the aggregate is the contingency approved, that would make more sense. That breaks, it tears away the dollar amount, the 50,000, which could really tie his hands, but it still limits it to the contingency that we've already approved for that contract. See what I'm saying? Aggregated, he can't exceed the budgeted contingency fund, which could be greater than the 50,000. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
All right, so. Can I make a motion on that?
Part of contracts.
You always make a motion. Are there any other discussion?
Any other discussions?
No, you could make a motion to approve it, then amend it to make that change, then approve the other one.
Two changes, actually. I'd like that two contracts to be changed, like you pointed out, to be to a contract, to make it a singleton instead of a plural, so that it says this is for each and every contract, not contracts in plural.
I got it.
And then change the item B to, you guys are better at the.
Okay, let me do the motion, and then we'll come back and amend it, okay? I move to approve Resolution 2018-0618A.
I second.
Okay, I have, okay, so now
So we have a motion by Vice President Rose to approve Resolution 2018-0618A, and it's been seconded by Director Chatham.
Chapman.
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 Anyway,
Okay,
Chatman,
Carman, Chapman.
Carman, Chatman.
I have an amendment.
Kind of rhymes with that stupid song.
I move to amend paragraph B to read, "The Board of Directors of the district hereby authorizes its general manager to approve change orders to a contract for the construction, repair, or restoration of district facilities, subject to the following terms and limitations." Let's do that one first,
Second it.
okay?
Okay, we have a motion by Vice President Rose to approve modifying Section B.
Two, just two,
Just two.
just paragraph two,
And I'm not gonna read it.
okay?
And it was seconded by Director Chapman.
I'll go with it.
Okay? Discussion?
Any
Vote.
discussion?
I'm going to come back to the next one.
Yeah,
Okay.
read it again, please.
The board, yeah, if I'd written it down, it would have been easier. The Board of Directors of the district hereby authorizes its general manager to approve change orders to a contract for the construction, repair, or renovation of district facilities subject to the following terms and limitations.
Yeah, so basically it's just, instead of say two contracts, to
A
a
contract.
contract. And two. Any discussion?
All in favor?
Okay, here, no discussion. First we'll entertain, first we'll take to a vote the amendment. And so, all in favor to amending two to apply to a contract instead of two contracts, indicate by raising your hands.
Okay.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I have
Now
a
we
s-
go back to the original motion.
I have a second amendment.
Okay, we have a second amendment.
The Second Amendment applies to 2B. The general which would be revised to read, the general manager may only approve change orders in an amount that when aggregated with all other change orders to a contract approved by the general manager does not exceed the contingency of that contract? Question mark, is that satisfactory?
Sounds good
The
to me.
contract contingency.
Good.
Do it again.
Does not exceed the contract contingency.
Okay, let me try it again. I'm going to try one more time. The general manager may only approve change orders, yeah, we'll just leave it that way, change orders in an amount that when aggregated with all other change orders approved by the contract, by the general manager within that contract, that they do not exceed the contingency of the contract.
Okay, we have a amendment by Vice President Rose that allows the that states the general manager may not approve change orders in the amount that, may not approve change orders
That exceed the
that
contingency.
exceed the contingency
Within
of
that
within a contract.
I'll second it.
Okay, Vice President Rose made the motion, Director Chapman seconded it. Any other discussion?
One possibility, I can't recall if it was Mark or Steve, but talked about the flexibility in individual cases, the board granting different authority. If you want, we could add language which just states in the context of any contract, the board could delegate a different amount of change order authority to the GM.
I think that's actually an A, because it says a contingency approved by the board, if any. So the board, that would give the board latitude to change it.
I guess that's right. Do it, but for instance, the 10% or something, but, yeah.
But I would disagree with you on that, because the contingency is typically based on, the contract is typically the authority of amount that we want to give a GM to approve. Typically, it's not a factor in determining the contingency.
Well, an example would be, if we wanted to change the 10% to 15% in any context, even though the contingency may be 20% of that contract. If you wanted to make sure you had that flexibility at the beginning of A, you could say, except as otherwise approved by the board, the general manager may not, yada, yada.
Any other discussion?
We're doing enough changes here. Do we want to let our legal take it back, rework it, and come back to us the next session?
Well, typically, the way this works is we would, after we would approve all this, then they would make those changes. Carmen or the attorney, someone would send, or maybe Lori would send it out to us, make sure it equals what we approved, and if all that is so, then we'd sign it then I'd come up here and sign it. Well, I would, so you'll have a chance to review it to make sure what you think you approve is actually
what's
reflected
being
in the
approved.
document.
Okay, that's all I wanted to make sure, yeah.
Are there any other discussion on this item? Everyone remember what we're about to vote on?
To be,
On the amendment? Yeah,
To be or not to be.
yes. So, all in favor, indicate by raising your hand. Any opposed? So we have Vice President Rose, Secretary Flynn, Director Chapman, Director Caswell approve. So all who are not in favor, myself, motion passes. I'm not in favor because if it's $600,000,
You get to express your opinion before you vote. Go ahead, Mr. President.
okay, now we have the original motion, which is to approve Resolution 2018-0618A
As amended.
as amended. And so that was put forward by Vice President Rose, and it was seconded by Director Chapman. Any other discussion there? Hearing none. All in favor indicate by raising your hand. Vice President Rose, Director Castaway, Secretary Flynn, and Director Chapman are all for it. All opposed? Motion passes 4-1. Okay, we are now on yes, me. Okay, consider and take appropriate action to adopt Order 2018, okay, these have the, okay. Order number 2018-0618, approving a public presentations policy. Vice President Rose, Secretary Treasurer Flynn, your item. You guys want to add commentary?
I've got it. What we have before us is a replacement public presentations policy. And I think that we were all sent out the current public presentation policy under separate cover. Let me speak briefly to the current public presentations policy. The current public presentation policy is basically applicable to those situations where someone comes in to make a presentation and they bring an electronic component with them that ties into our system. And the concern expressed back when that presentation policy was put in place was that there was a possibility of two things occurring, one of which is person intentionally or unintentionally introducing a virus into the system, or the possibility that there might be something within that presentation which would be deemed objectionable. Now, having said that, the policy was put into place, I'll give you the history, at the time period when I was working, attempting to get the wastewater, or the winter averaging into effect. And it was taken to the town because the town used the MUD's equipment at the time, and the town was asked to also implement this. And to put it nicely, the town said no. They did not see a need. In practice, during the time when I've been at the dais, when someone did have a presentation using our facilities, whether it would be a contractor or someone else, I asked several times, had the presentation been previewed to make sure that it wasn't virus, et cetera, and it had not that process had not been taken. So the question I had and have had along was, if it's going to be brought in and it contains a virus and you're going to preview it, then you're going to preview it on the MUD's systems in the general manager's office versus plugging it into the system here. And is there any difference in the virus detection capability, or are you just pick up the virus? And I asked for an input from M3, and I never got it on whether there was some intent there.
I did speak to them. I thought I forwarded you that context of that. There is no connection from these laptops, this area, to the server.
Okay,
Previously, when someone would submit a presentation, it did go automatically to M3 through a different setup, and they would just run it through a virus scan thing. That was it.
okay. So what I did when I looked at this, the MUD doesn't have, from my experience with what the town had, and it doesn't have a presentations policy other than what we have here. So taking a look at the history on it and realizing that we really didn't have one, what I then did is I went to the town's policy and basically excerpted it verbatim and then made a few minor changes on it, more specifically than others. The town's policy, because they have a police force that's there, that's part of their system, and they have an officer present, they could request if something was unruly and you needed the police officer to take action in that case, they could ask the police officer to take an action. We don't have enforcement present, so the action there would be to ask somebody on the staff to call to have somebody removed. But beyond that, what I have before us, what we have before us is basically a duplicate of what the town does. I think it's well worded and covers most situations. And if we approve the new one, it will replace the old one.
So, in looking at both of them side by side, the current process really gets at this whole, security issue, virus issue, where the new one certainly does not. That's kind of been taken out. However, the new one does go into a lot more detail than the previous one about meeting protocol, if you will. And maybe, Bill, that's what you're talking about, where certainly town council may not have the need for that, but we get pretty detailed into here and who can speak and when they can speak and what the policy is and when somebody gets unruly, who's going to throw them out, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit apples and oranges, but I understand how you got there.
My comment would be two things. One, I don't worry as much about the whole security thing, but I do think the first time something is looked at, I think someone needs to look at it and make sure it's appropriate. And that's appropriate it's not related to do you like what the person is presenting, but more along is it appropriate. And so I do think there needs to be an opportunity for it to be reviewed, and there doesn't seem to be any mechanism in the one that's written that allows for things to be pulled out, because it just says it's presented, if I'm not mistaken, 4 hours before the commencement of the board meeting, and then the copies will be distributed. And so I think we'd run into an issue at that point if you try to remove something. There's no mechanism in here for appropriateness. The policy doesn't allow for the district to say, no, we're not going to present this. The other thing is, there are things in here that go outside of a presentation policy. Under Section 3, I think 4, 5, and 6 has less to do with presentation and more to do with decorum of people that are in the audience, and is completely unrelated to presentations. And so I don't think they're really applicable to the agreement. One other question I have is under citizen comment, it says filed with the district secretary. To me, that means once we get the citizens card, we actually store them and keep them. Do we keep those? We do keep them? Okay, so then that's appropriate. So those are my concerns with the document at hand.
Yeah, that was my comment as well, Greg. Unless you said this was a public presentation / meeting protocol policy, that would be different,
Yes.
because you do get into meeting protocol. Whereas, to your point, that's really not public, that's not presentations as such. So you
Correct.
either take it out or
Just
revise
the title,
the title itself.
to adopting public presentations and meeting protocol
Fine,
policy.
that's what I would suggest.
Okay, I don't, yeah, no, second, I'll type it in here.
I also think we need to have something in here that allows a review and some discretion, not a obligation that we distribute everything that's presented, because I think that does require some discretion. Now, granted, again, it's not a matter of whether or not you like or agree with what the person is presenting, but there ought to be some mechanism to look at whether or not it's appropriate. So if someone put something that was obviously inappropriate, demeaning to someone, or many other things that would violate the sensitivities of common decent folks, we should not be obligated to display that or distribute that. And I really don't see a mechanism in here to pull those things out.
I don't know, and this is going to be a legal question. When you get into a citizens' we talk about common courtesy and decorum. I honestly don't know that when you get into a citizen's presentation situation, whether you have under freedom of speech the ability to limit. I mean, if you open it up to citizens' presentation, can you really limit free speech?
You can't conduct viewpoint discrimination, but obviously somebody couldn't yell fire
Exactly.
and do that. So you can't just based on viewpoint prohibit. It's a public forum and people have the right to free speech if you're going to open it up. But in terms of conducting the meeting to make sure you're not disrupting the meeting itself, protection of privacy, those types of things, you would still have the authority, but you cannot content discriminate based on someone's viewpoint.
And that's to my point. So my comment, for example, if someone put just something weird, a video, they want to play a video of
Yeah.
someone killing a dog. Well, obviously, we would not want to display that just because, if something really, really weird happened, someone wants to suggest we close the mud and go to TRA. Obviously, we can't say, well, we disagree with that, so we're not going to let you speak. But if it was something that was just inappropriate, pornography, or, if it was just a lot of expletives, we wouldn't necessarily want to be obligated to display that, at least in my mind. So
Right.
do we have flexibility? I'm trying to think of a control, something along those lines.
Yeah. I guess this is a question that, this was before my time, your existing policy, but in the same way, if somebody stood up and commenced discussing something that was inappropriate, along the same lines of what you mentioned, you would terminate that discussion. So I would ask the question whether the same thing you could do in the context of a video discussion.
Well, I think the biggest difference is if a person's speaking, we really don't have any reasonable way to get a person's thoughts before they speak up. But if someone presented a presentation, I think it would be reasonable for the citizens to say, hey, don't you guys look at the stuff before you just display it on your screen. And so I think, one, you really don't have a mechanism other than ask them to submit in advance what they're going to state, versus if they gave a presentation, we do really have a mechanism to screen that material for appropriateness. When I say appropriateness, not agreement with the topic, but that the material is appropriate.
Yes, you just need to be careful about restricting somebody's First Amendment rights.
And so that's the reason why I'm asking a legal question. Is there some type of verbiage that you could possibly think of that would take care of the objectionable material, but that wouldn't encroach on?
Yeah, and I haven't seen the policy before. Is there any type of pre-submission requirement?
No.
Well, doesn't it say it has to
In
be
the old
4
policy,
hours?
in the
Well,
old policy, the 4-hour discussion here is to allow, let me find it.
It's on the 4, on page, bottom of page 2.
Okay,
Wait for video presentation.
yeah,
We never.
this is for, yeah, the 4 is for written communications to the board. If somebody wants to send an email to the board, if it's at least 4 hours prior, then we can the secretary can make copies and distribute them to the board.
And see, and I took that to be including presentation. If someone did a PowerPoint, I
No.
took that to be a communication to the board.
No, this is strictly a written communication to the board. If you come in and did a PowerPoint, you would not, under this, be required to submit PowerPoint or script.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't understand that reading,
Yeah.
yes.
No, this is strictly if somebody's writing to the board, wants to get it, an email to the board, distributed to the board, then if they get it here, get it to the secretary 4 hours before, then that would be deemed under this policy sufficient time for the secretary to make appropriate copies and put them at the dais.
But that still doesn't address your point,
Yeah.
Greg, of,
No, it doesn't. I
No.
mean, not if you're looking to preview the visual aids or the script. No.
If I could also make a point, because virusware and that stuff's kind of like my bread and butter, that's what I do is computer security. All these laptops appear to be wired into the network, including printers and that stuff, and that's the latest exploit.
Yeah.
I mean, I would not plug anybody's USB stick or card into any of these computers, because a virus would get out of this.
Yeah, because they're all set to auto-run, and as soon as you plug it in,
Bingo.
it's there.
If
So-
it's if the virus got on any one of these computers, it would be throughout this building in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because they're not actually disconnected, Lori. They're actually connected here, as far as I can tell.
He was talking about the main.
Oh,
I
it's
can't
not like
pull
that.
things off of here. This laptop here and that system in there is not connected to the server.
Oh, okay, so
Connected to
those
the
are
main
not,
server or to the town server.
So
The
tho-
town can use it independently and so can we.
oh, okay,
These
then I will,
these
then I
have
will throw.
all, are all password protected and I connect them to the server when I bring them in.
Okay, then I withdraw. As long as that's an isolated system, I don't have a problem.
So I guess my concern, I think we have an obligation if someone's going to present something, and we have an obligation to reasonably view it for appropriateness. And again, appropriate being not that we agree with their position, but it's not offensive or derogatory or something along those lines. I think if we have the option to take a look at those things that
Yeah, if there's kind of support for that concept, then I would request, let me go back and see what types of language has passed constitutional muster, and we can bring that back to the board.
agreed.
Okay, I'd say we table this item and bring it back once we hear back from the
Refer to
attorney.
legal,
Yeah,
okay?
everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 6, consider and take appropriate action regarding order number 2018-0618B, authorizing general manager to approve certain expenditure, sign disbursement, enter into contracts on behalf of the district and containing other matters related thereto.
Mr. President. I'll just give this a real brief note. So we have disbursement policy that's been approved by the board. It dates back some time. And we've been endeavoring to update that to kind of bring it to the modern state. So for example, the previous policy included things like the fire chief's P-card expenditure limit. Well, the fire chief doesn't even work for us anymore. It called out specific folks on the staff and set their expenditure P-card limits. The policy that's in front of you kind of lets you set my P-card limit, which, by the way, I don't have one yet. But you set mine, and then I can delegate authority for P-cards to those I think are appropriate. So we do have some changing titles, and this policy will clear that up. When we first started talking about this with legal counsel, we found that in our existing policy, there were certain situations where we were applying state law that is applicable to contracts to purchases, which there is a distinction there, although it's a little bit muddied. And so we were probably over-constraining ourselves in that policy relative to the orderly purchase of goods and services. So this has been in front of the board now several times. It's been through legal counsel review, and we'd like to get it in place. It would allow little things like right now, Mike's expenditure limit on anything without my approval is $1,000. So he takes the truck in to get it serviced, and it goes over $1,000. He has to come and get my approval. The new policy allows me to set that approval limit up to, so a delegation of my authority up to the limit that I think is reasonable, and I think that's an appropriate approach. Tony, I don't know if you have any other comments to add to that.
Only this is another example of what we've talked about in terms of the delegation of authority. Legally, the board has the authority to delegate as much authority as it desires to the GM, subject only to the orders of the board. So there are some districts who delegated an incredible amount of authority to your GM. This proposed order would give your GM some greater authority in terms of contracts and expenditures, and remove some of the details in your existing policies, but it generally establishes an expenditure authority of $25,000 and requires expenditures that he exercises to be consistent with the budget adopted by the board of directors.
Okay, that was going to be my question. So what we're saying is there's maintenance for vehicles, and I'm making that up. There's a budget line that says maintenance for vehicles, and if there's one for $26,000, according to this, you would have to come back and get approval before you approve that. See, to me, that doesn't make sense. If we approve you to spend up to $26,000 for vehicle maintenance, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to have you come back and say, hey, can I spend the money you already told me I could spend? So as long as, in my opinion, as long as it was within the budget and it was money set aside for that purpose, I don't see any need to place a restriction there.
The flip side of that is that the budget is a tool for the board for financial planning purposes and is not an expenditure authorization itself. You may set aside funds in a budget for planning and financial purposes. That doesn't mean you're necessarily approving every expenditure that's in your budget. And so if you treat a budget as an expenditure approval, those are actually two different things. And so again, be careful of a budget is not an expenditure approval unless you make it such. But those are technically two different things.
And I completely understand the concept. I'm trying to think of something that will fall outside of that paradigm. I'm thinking of.
Well, let's just say we anticipate some IT, and let's put aside $100,000. So are you saying our GM can go out there and spend whatever he wants on IT improvements because we put money in the budget for that? I mean, so be careful. That may
Okay.
not be what your intent was. You were setting aside money But the details and the deliberation were going to take place at a future point. Sometimes you budget funds just in case something may happen. It may or may not happen. And so generally, you would delegate some authority for certain types of expenditures in accordance with the budget, routine operational matters, types things, versus some capital expenditures and other items where you may budget funds for that, but that's definitely not an authorization to undertake those capital expenditures.
Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking about it from the standpoint, vehicle maintenance, fuel,
R-
lube.
right, and-
It's things that are, it's not a whole lot.
More routine in nature.
Yeah, it's more routine-ish.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of a instance where we said, okay, well, let's set aside 100K for a particular item without a purchase in mind. Trust me, that wouldn't get by Bill Rose.
No, if you gave me an IT budget of 100,000, it'll get spent.
Oh, absolutely. So, comment, discussion?
No, I agree with Tony that we got to keep separate budget and expense because they are two different things. Budgeting for something is one thing. Giving authority to spend it just because you have the budget, different thing.
Yeah, we're not
I don't know
the-
how you separate those two.
We're not the feds. We can't go way over budget and run a deficit.
In this instance, as I described it, we never would because they're limited to that budget amount. So if they have 5,000 for pens, I mean, he could go out and blow $5,000 on pens.
I think the limitations, and I don't want to speak for Carmen, but I think the 25,000 and being in accordance with the budget is intended to cover most of those routine type of operational matters that arise. I think that's the goal. And frankly, your GM, and I think Carmen would do this on his own in anyways, more significant, unusual capital expenditures, he's going to bring those to the board for discussion and feedback.
I guess I'll throw it back to you, Carmen. Do you think this is the right level? Do you think this is appropriate?
I do.
Does staff agree with this?
I do. Let me say one other thing. So when you look in there, there's a provision, I forget exactly where it's at. I haven't looked at this in about a month, but there's a set aside for routine things like sending Fort Worth their check for
4.02.
for wholesale water. We added, so that provision kind of existed in the old policy. It's like routine, bills going to the electric company for power. We use a lot of power. That's not limited to $25,000. We're just going to pay our bills. I did add in that particular case the routine purchase of water meters. So we do that every year. We're replacing water meters. Very quickly exceeds the $25,000. So I did add that in this policy relative to the old one. But I did hope to structure a little more flexibility. So we have some changing titles. We're trying to collect some of our purchasing effort here in the back office so that we can let our ladies do more of the purchasing than our field folks. The old policy actually specified titles and P-card limits. This lets the board set my P-card limit. Again, I haven't gone to the effort of getting one yet, but then I have the ability to say, you know what, I want the lady at the front desk who's handling some of our just pen purchases to have a P-card for $3,000, and she has to submit all the expenses and do the work as suggested, but we're going to delegate her that authority, and she wasn't specifically listed in the existing policy. So I think this policy helps with flexibility at the staff level and still attempts to stay true to the original $25,000 limitation.
I can make a motion, and then I have 3 items I would like to discuss on the document.
Well,
Do you want to do discussion first, or?
I stopped. We had already begun.
Because you'll have to make a motion sooner or later. My question is down on 402. I'm on page 27 of the packet. Yeah, we'll do that one first. Yeah, it says, general manager may approve expenditures regardless of the amount for payment of routine expenses such as payment of electricity bills, purchased water payments to the city of Fort Worth, comma, for payment of solid waste collection services. I stop there. Is there really a reason that we have to say for Fort Worth, the city of Fort Worth in there? Can't we just say purchase water payments, comma, payment of solid waste collection services? Is there a reason that we have to specify city of Fort Worth?
We're only paying water bills that we purchased to one entity.
Yeah. So I would like to take that out. Down at 408D on page, I think I'm down to page 28 now. Authorized investment says the general manager may approve the electronic transfer of district funds for authorized investments as identified in the district's investment policy, semicolon, only upon prior approval of the investment officer of the district. I think what we've got to do here, what we have here is a carryover between an old policy that was changed and this policy. And the general manager is an investment officer, so what we're saying is he can only do it if he approves it. So I think we need to strike the phrase, and only upon the prior approval of an investment officer of the district.
You spend a lot of time second-guessing my own decisions.
Hey, don't want you talking to yourself. And if you go back to page 24, it says, Section 2, the Board of Directors hereby adopts the general manager purchasing and contracting policy in the form attached hereto as Exhibit A. And you go down to page 26, and you don't see Exhibit A there. And I think this may be a case of where we had some overlay in a header. May have wiped it out. Not so. Anyway, I think we need the term Exhibit A at the top of page 26. And those are the things that I see in the document.
Only thing that I would have loved to have seen the thing that is superseding, to make sure there's something not in there that we missed or didn't consider. If I'm superseding something, I always like to kind of see it.
Oh,
Mr. President, I believe we did in fact send that out to the old board, both the old and the new policy.
Okay.
We've been dealing with this for 6 months. But that said, I don't believe we've sent it to our new board members.
Any discussion on
let's try to
that
see if that
side
had.
of the?
Apparently they sent it to you, so.
I have no doubt. I don't recall it, but I have no doubt. Lori's pretty thorough, so.
Okay, it says in section 4, page 24, upon adoption of this order, the attached policy supersedes and replaces for all purposes resolution 2014-0715A. So it will supersede that.
Yes.
Ready for a motion?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Just because it's somewhat on my area here. On 4.02, as you were reading, Director Bill, or Vice President, it did talk about if the expenditure does not exceed the district's current budget, does that limit us if we're $1 over the budget in a certain electricity bill, that he can't approve the electricity bill?
Yes, as written.
I mean, that's kind of, if we are using the budget as a guideline, I mean, I hate to hold up paying the electricity bill because we're $1 over the budget. I mean, granted, I do the variance report every month, so you'll be able to see we're getting close to the budget, but if it goes over the last month of the fiscal year,
Gotta keep the lights on, right?
would help.
Are you talking about a budget line item or the budget?
Well, if it's gonna be electricity, I mean, it's gonna be the budget line item there, but it does not exceed. So is it strictly just the budget overall though, or is it gonna be the line item? I guess that's the question I have then.
If our electric bill exceeds the entire budget, then we have bigger problems than this.
We have one right now that will exceed the budget this year, without a doubt.
So
And that's
Talking
wastewater.
about the line item,
A
Bill?
line item,
Some-
a line
A
item.
line item will exceed the budget.
Yeah,
But that's
Dollar.
not, but that's not a routine operational expense.
yeah, it is.
He's talking about the sludge haul
It's
off.
not, yeah, it's not specifically listed, but it's a routine operational dumpster sludge item out of the wastewater treatment plant that and we can talk about when we get on into the agenda. I've mentioned it before, that it's higher than projected.
No. But the way this is written, it says exceeds the current fiscal year budget, the entire budget. So it would have to exceed $10 million. The way this is written, it doesn't say that particular item, line item, budget. This is saying the entire budget, the entire fiscal year budget.
Well, I mean, you have to have it that way, right? I mean, budgets are set, certain line items are gonna be a little bit above, certain will be a little below. You can't micromanage down to every
Yeah,
single
no,
line.
and I agree with
No,
you. If it-
that's
if
what you're
it's
saying.
I mean, if it's an electric bill, I mean, you're not gonna not pay it, even if it exceeds the budget.
And I believe the variance report, in fact, covers those things that exceed
Oh, it
or
does.
underwhelm.
Yeah. We are briefed on it. There's no doubt about it. But the thing, as I mentioned, the routine operational expense, it says such as, which means this is a partial list. It's not a complete list.
Correct.
And the dumpster, to me, would be routine. I mean, when you sign the checks, you're gonna see it every month.
No, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
It's definitely
So,
routine.
but if doesn't see, because the way, as you mentioned, the way it's written, it does not say the district's then current fiscal year budget line item.
Yeah, it's the entire budget.
Okay.
For the non-routine expenditures above in section B, Romanet 2 above, that refers to specific cost centers within the budget. But for these routine operational matters, the only limitation is the overall budget, just to make sure there's expenditures aren't being made for which there's no money. It's not tied to individual line items or cost centers.
Yeah, to be honest with you, at that point, I'd almost say strike it because even water, it's 3.5 million. The budget's 10. So it's not even conceivable that you'll have a particular ordinary item exceed the entire budget. Unless Mike is drinking a lot of water or we're selling a lot of water, so there'll be revenue on the other side. That'll be a good problem to have.
No, actually, my interpretation is if it turns out there is all of the budgeted funds available in the fiscal year have been used up regardless of what they were used for, we don't want the general manager writing checks for which we don't have money, including
okay.
routine operational matters.
Okay,
So not just that line item, just, if we spend all of our money for the fiscal year, our budget's gone.
Yeah,
We
and
want the board to,
yeah, and I wasn't viewing it that way. Okay, I see what you're saying.
We'll be back for an amendment.
Yeah.
I would hope you guys would know that's coming, for sure.
Are there any other tweaks anyone would like to see?
Okay, I'll make a motion. I move to approve Trophy Club Municipal Utility District Number 1, Order Number 2018-0618B with the following amendments. At the above Trophy Club Municipal Utility District Number 1, General Manager Expenditure Disbursement and Contracting Policy, add Exhibit A. And on 4.02, change or delete the prepositional phrase, "to the city of Fort Worth," comma, 4, and then put a comma after payments. And in 408D, delete on the third line, delete the semicolon followed by "and only upon approval of an investment officer of the district," period. That's my motion.
That's a comma, not a semicolon.
Is that it? Okay, comma.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Rose to approve Trophy Club Mud One District Order Number 2018-0618B to add Exhibit A at the top of the first page under 4.2 to strike to the city of Fort Worth. And then under 4.8D to strike "and only upon prior approval of investment officer of the district." Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
The motion was seconded by Secretary Treasurer Flynn. Any other discussions on these items?
Just one point on that 402, it gets the 4 after all.
Okay, City of Fort Worth. Then you have
Four.
payments.
Water payments, comma, payment of purchased. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so it would read water payments, comma, payment of solid waste collection services.
Okay, add comma 4 to the deletion under 4.2.
Yeah.
Any other discussion on these items? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Consider and take appropriate action regarding approval of change order number 15 from Weber Cadagua Partners in the amount of $35,566 for wastewater treatment plant improvements. Staff.
Mr. President, I think we have a handout perhaps that shows the actual amount. So
The handout that's in the attachment has that amount in it.
it does have the proper
Yeah.
number. So that number went down to 25,268.
269.
So this was a negotiated price for work already done between our engineer and Weber Cadagua Partners using the RS means method to negotiate, who had to pay for what. It is a piece of work that was done over a month ago. We had to get the energy company out to cut us off. We ran on generators all day while we switched the wiring over. So the work was done, and after the fact, we came to, in fact, earlier today was when it was finally approved by the contractor. We had it on the agenda last Thursday, and so the numbers are different from start to finish, but staff is supportive of paying this amount. We feel like it's a reasonable representation of our share of the costs and recommend approval.
Vice President Rose.
I move to approve change order number 15 from Weber Cadagua Partners in the amount of $25,269.64 for
Not to exceed.
wastewater treatment plant improvements, not that amount. Let me rephrase it. Get it right the first time. Move to approve change order number 15 from Weber Cadagua Partners in an amount not to exceed $25,269.64 for wastewater treatment plant improvements.
We have a motion by Director Rose to approve change order 15 from Weber Cadagua Partners in the amount not to exceed $25,269.64 for wastewater treatment plant improvements. Do I have a second?
A second.
That motion was seconded by Director Castaway. Discussion.
How did you come to that number?
It's
Okay.
on page 32 of the packet.
Okay.
Yeah, they had an amendment.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, see it right, so past all that red.
Okay, gotcha.
Turn your head to the left.
You stand on my head here.
You can rotate
Got
it.
it? Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, call for the vote. All in favor indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, number 8, consider and take appropriate action regarding independent contractors agreement for general manager services. A, performance evaluation of general manager. And B, discussion of possible action regarding approval of Second Amendment to independent contract agreement related to compensation. When it said approval of the Second Amendment, I instantly went someplace else. Okay. Well,
Mr. President, do you want me in the room? I can step out. I know you have to talk about this in open session, but if you prefer, I'm happy to step out.
I'm fine with you staying. I'll leave it up to the rest of the board on.
Yeah, I'd like you to stay. If we have any questions, you could answer.
Agreed.
I've got no problem.
Okay, so one of the things that was passed out to you was General Manager Carmen's request. So I think we really have to do 2 things. One is a performance evaluation, determine whether or not we're happy with the service that has been provided. And if we're comfortable and would like to move forward, then consider the request that he's made. As one of the people who initially met with him, the board really set out 3 or 4 goals for General Manager Carmen when he joined the district. 1, to get through the rate appeal. The second item was to get through to improve the relationship with the town. The third one was related to, and I just drew a blank.
Construction litigation.
Yes, get us through construction litigation and kind of wrap up the wastewater treatment plant, get us through that construction. He was successful in all of them except for the wastewater treatment plant, so we will hold you accountable for it not being done.
Mr. President, I think the 4th one was actually to help with the selection of my successor, and we're not there yet. So
Okay, so it was a joke about not getting the wastewater treatment plant done.
And-
And then come up with a succession plan for the district. So those were really the 4 things that he was asked to do.
So, just so I'm clear, Greg, you're talking about the performance evaluation is based on those 4 items?
Well, those were the 4 things that we laid out as these are the 4 things we would like for you to accomplish. And
Okay.
so we need to not only look at, how well he's done as it relates to those 4 things, but there's been a myriad of things that have come up that obviously we could not have foreseen, and just to order the normal day-to-day responsibilities of running the district.
Well, I think as one of the newbies, we're not really qualified, haven't been around long enough to even be a real part of this. Everything I've seen of him, he's been professional and everything else, so as far as I'm concerned, he's doing a bang-up job. But you and Bill are the ones that can rate him against the original criteria.
But that's my point. I mean, a performance evaluation of anybody is based on a set of criteria of this is your job expectation, and you met the goals or you didn't.
Yeah.
And they're measurables, right?
Yeah.
So that exists, I would assume, other than the 3 or 4 things you're talking about?
No, we did not set out a document where we laid out goals as you would do in a much like you would have had in GM. The goals were verbally communicated through a general consensus of the board. So there was not a document that was laid out that listed those goals.
Okay, I guess my only issue is then how do you perform a performance evaluation against what?
Well,
Well, and I'd also point out, Greg, on page 37 of your packet, you'll see a description of his job responsibilities under his contract. So that's,
That's
Steve,
what I'm
may be a
getting
a
Okay.
baseline.
Perfect. Yeah.
So I'll give my perspective. I've enjoyed my time working with General Manager Carmen. There's been a number of very, very difficult things the board has had to deal with, and I think he's done a outstanding job in addressing those. I think he's provided good guidance on approaches to take. The fact that he's been an engineer has been great as far as a sounding board as it comes to relating with working with some of our contractors. Think the things that have not been done, specifically related to wastewater treatment plants, there's some things that I don't think a man is just possibly capable of doing, given the circumstances and the hand he was dealt. But overall, I think he's done a great job, and I'm very happy with his performance. That's my perspective. Vice President Rose?
Well, I think you've been effective in the job, very, very capable. I haven't seen any tasks that you failed once you undertook them. I mean, when we're involved in them, some of the projects may not be proceeding at the pace you might have anticipated, or that we might have anticipated. I think about the water line now and the iterations that it's gone through. So I was kind of surprised earlier to hear that we were, didn't have something from TCEQ, and we're still here again because of actions that the board had taken in revision, still talking TCEQ. I hope to see that wrap up. There are some items that in the future I'd like to see done, but they fail when you put them on a scale to measure of importance. I mean, I'd like to get the water use balanced out between the days. We've talked a little bit about that, but here again, when you say I'm trying to balance out the water use between days and the residents, when you talk about when you balance that against trying to wrap up the wastewater treatment plant and all of the fun that entails, and you talk about putting in a line on out to the east tank, and you talk about building a line, getting over to PD 30, and all of those things that are going on, it's a case of priorities. And I think as a board, we have to recognize those priorities and understand that you're putting your efforts in the best vein. I also, I have somewhat of a concern about the level of the staff manning, which is kind of like, I would like to say it's a continuing problem. Going forward, I'd like to see that resolved, and we've talked a little bit on the side about organizational alignment and whether you have a wastewater treatment plant operator and a water plant operator and then an operations, kind of like an operations manager, that type thing. Looking forward, I'd like to see those brought forward on what your plan is, what your vision is, so, and what assistance and, what makes that plan better than where the mud was operating before. So I think those are things that, looking forward, we've got to look to. You saw come in at the very end of the budget. You saw what happened there.
That was day 2.
That was day 2. That was an interesting moment. So anyway, I look forward to seeing what you were able to accomplish with the budget and what the board can do up front to assist you so that we don't surprise and pull staff. pull the carpet out from underneath staff. So, I mean, that's just overall, I find you, when I have questions, I find you responsive. And,
I don't always know the answers.
but I don't mind hearing I don't know the answer to that. I find that when we think we know the answer and we don't, you're amiable to checking it out, and it doesn't bother you to come back and say, well, it's not where I thought it was. And that's refreshing. I appreciate honesty from staff, even when it's not always what you would like to hear. So, and I appreciate those things.
You know, being obviously brand new on the board, I don't have a lot of experience with Carmen as a board member. You mentioned something, Greg, and it's probably the bullet point 15, Roman numeral 15, I guess. Promote cooperation among board members, or board of directors, staff, citizens, developing public policy, blah, blah, blah. But you said something to the effect of working closely with town council, or working.
Working closely.
Working closely.
Developing a better relationship with the town.
Exactly. That's a hot button for me, not just for Carmen, but for us as a board. Quite frankly, that's why I ran, because I wanted to improve that, because I think there's always room for improvement. So I would challenge Carmen to keep that on the forefront of your 16 other things, that working with our town council and improving that is all of our responsibility, but certainly on your plate as well.
Director Chapman, any comments?
No, I think, like I said, as far as I've seen, he's been professional for as long as I've been watching his time here.
Director Hester?
Yeah, I feel the same way. Every time I've had a question or concern, I've gone to you, and you've been very helpful, so I appreciate that. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Okay, I think we have a issue that when it comes to the contract, we have to address. So within this contract, what page is it on? There's a hard cap. It is on page,
Section 2.1, I think. On page, looks like 39.
yes, on page 39, section 2.1. There's a total compensation not to exceed $144,000. When we negotiated this agreement, it was based on the premise that he would take more vacation, and for whatever reason, a number of reasons that really didn't materialize. And so he's running up on a hard cap. And so I think he has 2 weeks left for the next 6 weeks. So I think we have to look at removing the cap at a minimum, or expect him to only work 2 of the next 6 weeks, because he will exceed the 144K, if I'm not mistaken. And Stephen, you can let me know if I,
Yes, so currently, as of May 31st, which is the last invoice I got, he's at 1,625 hours, which accumulates to 121,875. It gives him a remaining balance of 22,125, or roughly about 295 hours left on this cap.
so that's 5 weeks for the last 2 months.
It gives him basically 147 and a half hours per month he can get over the next 2 months. Not counting what he's done these last 2 weeks, for 18 days in June.
So there are 2 weeks, what you're saying is there are 2 weeks that are not in that calculation
I
already.
can only go off of what's been billed and invoiced. So I won't
Okay.
have this month's. I just have up until the end of May, which is 10 invoices.
Okay, so we need to address that. One of the other things, as you can see in the note we have, he's requesting a increase to $85 an hour.
A decrease. Decrease, right?
No, an increase. Right
Okay.
now, he's currently at 75.
Oh, I thought he was at 89. Okay.
And then on top, and in addition to that, he is requesting mileage to and from the office, as well as tolls. I looked through the agreement, I think it's, I think he mentioned in here, according to the agreement, it allows for him to do mileage. When I've read the agreement, I do not see that, conceptualized in the agreement, so,
Are we talking, Greg, just so I'm clear, mileage? Because somewhere it talks about mileage for not to and from the office, but anywhere else. You go,
what he's requesting now is mileage to and from the office, because he lives in downtown Fort Worth. And that's the reason why I'm going over these, just to be clear what the request is. So those are the three things that he is requesting. An increase from $75 an hour to $85 an hour, mileage from his point of residence to the office, a removal of the cap, and tolls.
Is that tolls driving to and from work?
Mr. President, if I could clarify, when I came on board, they told me I could take the general manager's vehicle home, which comes with a, an expense, right? Because it's considered like that would be a normal employee. You're talking about me coming to the office. I would rather say coming to the job site.
The job site,
I'm a
okay.
contractor, and so when we pay our attorneys or our engineers to come out, they're billing us both for their time and their mileage. And if they incur tolls, they're billing for that as well. I'm spending 10 to 12 hours a week commuting, and to the extent I can use tolls, I like to drive my car at less than legal speeds, or more than legal speeds maybe, to get here, but it's a lot of time out. I'm not requesting to bill for that time, but I don't have a place to park the general manager's vehicle, and so that was not a benefit to me, and to some extent seemed to kind of step over that contractor versus W-2 employee sort of line. So that's why I put that request in there. I had effectively a verbal agreement with our previous board chair that, if I drove my car to the wastewater plant, I could bill the miles, and I've done that. Or I drove my car to Austin to visit with TCEQ, I billed the miles. So I've done that.
The mileage rate is based on the Fed
Yes.
rate? Okay.
That's correct. And the amount of money I presented is not including the miles, it's just the hours. So we do not
Okay.
include the expenses.
I was looking at this, and I've been a contractor for most of my life too, and I'm kind of wondering how they came up with this cap and that stuff, because I normally go by 2080 per year hours, and you don't have anywhere near that.
Well, we did 2080, but we based it on 1920 because the thought was that, one, his son attends school at UT, so he would be attending swimming competitions. His son redshirted this year, so that didn't materialize. He also had a project with a university. I think he actually fulfilled that agreement, and then there was also going to be some additional time off, possibly doing other contracts or work outside of the district. So it was built, the hours were calculated, built on a lot more time being taken off than he actually took off.
Oh, okay.
And so that was the rationale behind the number of hours.
There was an interest in setting a not-to-exceed limit on the contract, which was somewhat arbitrary, but basically it was 48 weeks of work out of 52, assuming a 40-hour week, and there are a lot of weeks when I've not spent 40, it's been longer, and I've billed them. I mean, I do that, so I get a call from Greg on my way home, and we talked for the whole hour. I'm billing you guys for that. I am, so.
Yeah, I would, if those considerations are no longer there, I would bump that back up to a 2080.
Well, I guess my recommendation would be we just remove the cap, and
Okay.
he charges what he works, rather than trying to anticipate or
As long as he
speculate.
doesn't kill himself working 80 hours a week,
Yeah, that would be, well, then the cost would drop off quickly.
at some point, yeah, at some point.
Yeah, as he drops, nah, I'm assuming reasonable. I mean, I've never had a cap on my contracts either, but, there's a level of sanity there.
Yeah, yeah.
But-
I would say this, personally, I've spent years contracting. I've never been able to charge toll or miles. And so that's not been my experience.
And Greg, I was going to say the same thing. That's the only thing I'm having a little heartburn over. I mean, to and from your place of residence to your office or to your workplace. In every place I've worked, I haven't been a contractor, but that's kind of a given. You would live someplace, you go to work someplace. That's part of being on the job, a part of where you decide to live, and that's it. However, if you're going to go down to Austin or you're doing this and there's tolls, that's different. So that's the one issue I'm struggling with as well.
And actually, I'm kind of opposite you because I have done a full time and materials and time and mileage type contract, up to and including when I had contracts where when I left my house, the clock started. That included plane flights and that stuff. But I was an IT contractor working around the world, so there's a little difference there than a local.
Was that with,
job.
was that with your firm, or was that with Mark Chapman Enterprises?
Mark Chapman Enterprises. I was
Okay. Well, that, for me, for me, this is easier to do in chunks rather than trying to bite off the whole elephant. So I'd be interested in getting the board's view, like on those items, and then we could go to the other pieces. That's my thought, but I'm open to approaching it a completely different way if the board would like to go that route.
well, his hourly rate looks legitimate to me. I mean, that $10 bump, I don't see any problem with that. Does anybody?
I was looking at 5%.
Yeah, I was looking at a $5 increase, not a percentage, but just when you say, you're looking at literally 5% or a $5,
5%.
excuse me, 5%. Okay, well, let's do this. So one, I guess, is everyone open to removing the maximum, not to exceed price in 2.1? Is everyone comfortable with removing that?
Yes.
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 Okay, so on mileage and tolls, so we have two that seems like that's not been my experience. And so, your experience has been you have negotiated that?
Yeah, but like I said, mine was a little bit different. Definitely tolls I can see throwing in there. Mileage,
I understand that when you hired on, you had just leased your apartment
I
in
own
Fort
it.
Worth.
I own it.
Fort Worth. But to me, it's you choose where you live. And so your expenses getting to and from work are your expenses.
I agree.
Director Casway?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you do choose where you live and you choose where you work. And I don't think mileage should be included or tolls when there's different ways to go around not using the tolls. Or when you have different options of not using tolls.
Okay. On the mileage, my experience has been, if you're going to a place outside of the work site, so if you're going, if you go to Austin or San Antonio or something along those lines, to me, those are no-brainers that you reimburse a person for those mileage. Is that pretty consistent?
Yes.
Anything other than the job site, if you're going outside of that. So then we get down to the rate. My thought was a bump up to $80 an hour versus going to 85. Be kind of, Bill said 5%, so 5% of 75 is,
Coming up to 78 something.
so Director Rose wanted to go to 78. I said 80.
Let me get the number. 78, 75 is where 5%'s at.
78, 75 versus 80.
I think he should get the whole thing. I agree with his price tag.
Okay, 85,
I'm good on 80.
80.
80.
I'm only off $1.25. I can get to 80.
Okay.
Oh, that's cruel.
It's not a cigar even.
Okay, so, you want me to make a motion?
You've got it.
Okay, I make a motion that, and the contract automatic, I'm sorry?
Just one thing, maybe we should ask him how he feels
with this, could say bye-bye.
You know, I find the response inadequate, actually. When I look at, I shared with our president the initial salary result survey for the general manager staff. When you include the benefits, life insurance, and other things that I'm paying as an independent contractor out of the salary I get, $85 per hour is less than the midpoint of the general manager range.
Are you using general manager for like Benbrook, or are you
I'm using, look at the bottom of the table.
Yeah, you basically added all those up and then just did a,
I just take what it says the average is, and
Okay,
then
the average of that.
add $30,000 a year in benefits, which I would get if the board was contributing 14% of my salary to the retirement fund, and say 10 grand a year in health benefits. I'm quickly at $85 an hour. So that was in my email that I shared.
I have a question here. In this salary comparison, is this base salary only in these locations, or is this a package?
Stephen, if you want to talk to that. So this is salary survey. We selected the groups that we're going to benchmark against. They went out, they asked for job descriptions for all of these. They got them back, they got their salary ranges, and that's what you see. Now, we didn't get all of them to submit the job descriptions back.
Well, it's not a job description question. The question is, does this pay range midpoint include benefits or not?
Yes, in every case, it does.
So that's a benefit included
Yes.
price. So if that's a benefit included price, and you want to consider benefits, then the price you would be looking at is $141,717.
Plus benefits.
No, you said the benefits were included here. If they're included
No,
here,
that-
then they're
sorry,
included
that's
there.
that's their salary range, but all those folks get benefits, is what I meant.
Okay, well, that was my question.
Sorry.
Is whether the benefits were included in those
No.
numbers.
if we took $80 an hour times 2080, and that's assuming there will be some vacation time, but there's also times where, and holidays.
Sick days.
Sick days, even though I haven't seen you sick, so I
No,
think
I've
you're
been-
a
I've
machine.
been
I've
sick
seen
as
him
a dog.
sick.
He'll be sick tomorrow.
I've seen him sick in here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we're gonna excuse you, Bill. Based on that, roughly, that's 166. When I look at the midpoint of all of these positions, it exceeds all of them. The one that's closest is the AWWA, Association Large Top Executive.
But again, Greg, you gotta add the benefits.
No, I will. And so I'm not sure that we fall in that category. And then if we take at the others, if you add, and you're saying additional 30% to that.
30 grand is the number I picked.
I'm sorry?
That's- So 14% of whatever the salary is, let's say it's the midpoint of the GM salary range, and I was making that as a W-2 employee. You're gonna pay 14% of that salary into the retirement fund, whatever that number is. That comes up to about 20 grand. And then there's about another 10 grand in insurance.
Okay,
That-
and so if we looked at South Lake, and just to make the numbers round, 25 grand, that puts it at 162. Louisville, 25 grand, that puts it at 172. Keller, 25 grand, that puts it at 153. Grapevine, 25 grand, puts it at 170. Denton, 25 grand, puts it at 170. Grapevine was like 173. Benbrook, it puts it at 150. A large, it puts it at 175. In most of these, we're 5 or 10 above, and a few of them we're 10 below. So it seems to be, if we took a average of all of these, we're at the midpoint. I'd say if we took an average of all of these, plus 25K, this is pretty consistent with those. Is it the top of all of them? The top of the most highest paid one? No, but it's above 4 of the 5 or 5 of the 7 at what that midpoint would be. And those positions obviously wouldn't get mileage, those things wouldn't be considered on those. So from my opinion, it's pretty competitive with the salaries that's listed on here.
Do we know what the 2 prior mud GMs made?
I'm sure that data is available.
I think she made 125,
Okay,
Not including benefits.
not including benefits.
Okay.
It was,
Is it getting hot in here, or is it just me?
But here again, I would say that the very last GM was significantly below that, but the capabilities proved that it was overpriced.
yes. So I would, and I don't mean it to compare Carmen to our last GM.
I don't know who
Wouldn't
that
be-
was, yeah.
Wouldn't be fair. But I'd even say, even the GM before that, I mean, in addition to the years of water and wastewater experience, also being an engineer. So I think he's by far the most credentialed and talented GM that this district has had, probably in its history.
I'd probably agree.
Are you looking for that number, Stephen? Correct. If I remember correctly, she was somewhere in the 120 to 125 range.
Okay.
So it sounds like it's less, right?
Yeah,
We
oh,
all
it's
know,
definitely.
we know it's a lot less.
Yeah, it's
So-
not a question of it was,
No.
that's
Is that
about.
because he's contracted?
Well, partially, yes. So when we looked at it, that was a component of looking at what the compensation would be for a contract basis, because he's not going to get retirement or those other benefits. So that was kind of the rationale behind that. He's having to pay his share of FICA, whereas as an employee, that would be covered by the district, so.
Okay.
You're also having to pay self-employment tax, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a nasty.
Well, if you're working off the 2080 number, and you go to $80 an hour, you're at 166.4.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
Yes. And that's, yeah.
Which is allowing 25 above the midpoint for the insurance and other costs, so.
Retirement,
Retirement.
self-employment tax.
Yeah, I think that's more than South Lake, it's more than Keller, it's slightly less than Denton and Grapevine. It's more than Benbrook, it's less than AWWA large. So it's more than most and only slightly below, 176 would be the top, so the AWWA large, it's 10 less than that. But every other one is within a few $1,000s of what those would be. I don't know, I think the 80 is a fair offer and expenses that exceed the, so would that be acceptable to you, General Manager Carmen?
It's your call. I'm just telling you, I think you're missing it. That's all. I think you're missing it. Generally speaking, when you talk about the middle of the salary range, you're talking about someone who's achieved full competence. And the reasons you'd be above the midpoint of a salary range is that you have experience and skill set that you bring that exceeds just basic full competence. So I think you're what's the word, underwhelming me.
So in the next 6 weeks, you can only work 2 weeks? Is
No,
that,
it's 2 weeks each month is about what it works out to.
okay. Then who would take over your, like,
It's just time off. I mean, so, at the end of the day, we had that cap in there because that was of interest. And I think, I'm getting close to having worked 48 out of 52 weeks. But if you look at a given year, there's 8 holidays.
Yeah.
There's center employees get 2 weeks of vacation, so many days of sick leave. So that adds up to a certain amount. I did have my work with Texas State University, which I really enjoyed. I took some time off to go do that. I am planning on taking a week off in August, which is kind of in the middle of the budget session, to go do some fishing in Utah, and that's my plan. And over the next 2 months, I am going to take a couple of 4-day weekends, which is 2 days off and through the weekend. So, we're not missing it by that far, but we're running into the cap. I guess that's the point, and the reason why I brought it up, because I remembered that cap was there. I just couldn't remember what it was.
Okay.
I guess,
As far as the hours, just to kind of clarify, if he's averaging basically 162 a month is what the average is for the last 10 months. If he did that these next 2 months, he's only over by 30 hours. So we're not talking, it's really a week out of the next 2 months is what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think in general, I think there's a general consensus that having a cap is just another constraint of something that we have to worry with. And if he's working hours and, to me, doing a job, then having an artificial constraint, to me, doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
To answer your question, it was a little over 118.
She made 118? Okay.
18
Thank you,
plus
Stephen.
118 plus
Plus.
25, what we figure the benefits were worth.
I can pull it up.
If you said 25, that would put it at 143.
I don't know how you come to 25, though. I put 29 in the thing, just talking about retirement and health insurance. That does not include self-employment tax, so that's 15% for me.
Well, 7.62. The board would pay half.
Right.
Yeah.
So whatever 7.62 plus 14, that's 21%. Then you add in whatever we're paying per employee on health insurance and whatever other miscellaneous benefits come into it. I think it's more than 25.
So are there any other discussions?
no, I guess my last comment is, I understand, Carmen, your position about, where you are relative to everybody else. That's a fair comparison. By what we're looking at, it seems like that's right in the mid-range, if not a little above. You mentioned that, experience should pay for something. Don't disagree with that. We're not talking about a newbie here. We're talking about a very experienced individual that is a well-run operator. That said, you're under a current salary that was negotiated back at the beginning. I guess my comment would have been, if there was concerns about that salary back then, did we use this comparison then? And if so, was that discussion had or whatever? But that's been kind of the starting point of where we're at, and we're going up from there. So from that perspective, I'm comfortable with where we're at.
Fair enough. Can we avoid the use of the word salary? I'm a contractor.
Point taken.
Yeah. So I make a motion that we strike the not to exceed under section 2.1 of the general manager's compensation for services. We increase the hourly rate to $80 from $75 within the agreement, and we add a provision to pay mileage based on the federal limit that's identified in the IRS standard for any travel outside of, in addition, any travel that exceeds the distance from the contractor's home to the work site.
Any chance we could split those into 3 separate motions?
I guess we could. That's rather be a roll, Shesh.
Yeah.
But I guess we could?
You can.
Okay. You
can-
absolutely can do it.
You can request it, or you can make a motion to, what's it called, divide?
Mr. Roberts. Okay, I'll retract the motion. Okay, so I make a motion that we strike the hard cap of $144,000 in section 2.1 of the general manager's contract.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by myself, seconded by Vice President Rose. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Okay, I make a motion that we increase the general manager's hourly rate from $75 to $80 per hour in the general manager's agreement.
I'll second it.
Motion's been seconded by Vice President Rose. Any discussion? All in favor indicate by raising your hand. Vice President Rose, Director Casway, Secretary Treasurer Flynn approve. Any opposed? Director Chapman's opposed. Motion passes 4-1. And I make a motion to
Where's it going?
allow, add a reimbursement for mileage that exceeds from the contractor's home to job site.
We need to find where you're going with it, and
It's not in here anywhere.
there's a reimbursement for reimbursement of expenses, section
Expenses.
5.3, 5.4.
And it just says will not be liable for any expenses.
Except as provided in 4.
Where do you see that?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's something that put him under the MUD's reimbursement policy someplace.
I do not recall seeing it in the agreement. Not gonna say it's not there, but I don't recall seeing it.
I think in the prior First Amendment, we made him subject to the MUD personnel policies, if that's what it is.
Okay, because I don't have, I don't have, I've got Amendment 2, but I don't have Amendment 1. Can we check Amendment 1? Let me have it in my file.
I believe Amendment 1 related to my ability to
Has to do with
Yes,
personnel.
yeah,
hire or fire, something along those
Yeah,
lines.
it was related to personnel. It didn't address
I think I've got it right
any
here.
expense reimbursement.
Gave him the authority to exercise the authority of the GM relating to personnel matters as set forth in and in accordance with the district personnel policy manual.
Yep, okay, so we don't have it.
Yeah.
So would a statement that we reimburse for mileage in accordance with the district policy? I'd have to find the
What's the
I'm
name
s-
of
I'm
that
searching.
policy, Stephen, do you know? District's policy on travel and expenses.
Under the personnel. It's under our personnel policy, 2.23.
What does it state? Is it voluminous?
Section 2.23B, reimbursement expenses, all district-paid employees' travel must be unnecessary distant business, the details of which shall be approved in advance by general manager.
We can't use that because it says for district employees, and he's not a district employee.
It's correct.
When approved in advance by general manager, employees shall be paid mileage for personal vehicles at current IRS rate. Employees must provide evidence of liability and property damage, yada, yada. As a board of directors, you have a similar policy where you guys can put in for reimbursement of travel and expense. That might be the way to go.
Yeah. So I guess I would, did anyone second my motion? But did it ever get that far?
I don't think it got that far.
Don't think it got that far.
Yeah.
I'm
So
trying- I'm
I-
still trying to find that personnel policy.
So I'd say, make a motion to allow reimbursement of expenses for, the general manager, when he's, for any, mileage that exceeds, the distance between traveling from his residence to the job site, or when traveling on, district business.
A second.
Okay, we have a second by Director Castaway. Any discussion? Vice President Rose?
Yeah, what I've got here is a basic, I'm still struggling with the basic, larger picture in that when he travels to Austin, even though he's a contractor, he's reimbursed as an employee, correct? Because we pay him mileage and we pay him meals, I would imagine. We don't pay his meals covered?
Just the mileage.
Just the mileage.
As if it's no more as if a director, not really looking at an employee, because it doesn't go through payroll, so to say. It's actually as a director going through as a 1099.
And that's the reason why I said expenses, because if he's traveling on business, it's customary, if you're traveling on business, then those, you would normally eat at home, so you wouldn't necessarily incur additional costs. But if you're traveling on business outside of the local area, then you would incur expenses. And I think that's a reasonable position to take by the district to pay those expenses.
I would agree.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by a raise of your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, consider and take appropriate action regarding the May 2018 combined financials and variance report. A, combined financials, B, combined variance. Secretary Treasurer Flynn?
I'm not sure how to respond to that, other than I reviewed them. Had a couple questions with Stephen that he answered to my satisfaction. So I would move to approve the,
Yeah, and I would just say typically, you would only point out if there was something extraordinary that you thought was worthy of the board to see,
I did not see that.
okay? So,
So I would move to approve the May 2018 combined financials and variance report, combined financials, and combined variance report.
okay, we have a motion by Secretary Treasurer Flynn to approve the May 2018 combined financials and variance report. Do we have a second?
A second.
Second by Director Chapman. Any discussion? Director Rose?
I have a question. I may have more than one. In the budget summary, page 53, I've probably been told this more than once, but we have a PID surcharge there.
What page, on, Bill?
I'm on
53.
page 53.
It's the fourth item from the top.
Yeah. When does that happen?
Okay, so that trues up at the end of the year, and then we.
Fiscal year?
No, the end of the calendar year. That is something that was set forward back in previous times, that it's not on a fiscal year. So we have to do a bunch of calculations at the end of the fiscal year to try to make up and wash out the accounts. And then the end of the actual year, they have 30 days from the time I invoice them. You invoice them mid-January with what the difference is, or they invoice us if there's the other way around. We have 30 days to pay.
Okay, so the PID surcharge is from last year.
Right, there'll be a true up.
Were taken care of at the end of the calendar year.
So
Were
it's
those
actually,
put in then they were carried back into last year's budget?
so for instance, this year they paid for so the fiscal year, you're having multiple fiscal years because you are going off the calendar year. So starting from January to December is the year they're paying for. So in February time, March time, they're gonna pay for this year's difference, if there is a difference. And the way that works is they give a rate, we give them how many customers we have, they give a rate. Obviously, not everybody pays, so what happens over time is they're in the arrears and they have to make up for it.
Okay, but you said in February, I'm now in June. So, but I've got remaining budget, 177,000.
Because this budget is based on going forward, so you're always, you're looking at the end, you're looking off of the fiscal year here. This fiscal year really hasn't really, we haven't collected anything for this fiscal year. We don't collect for this one until next February.
Okay,
March, whenever it comes.
which was going to be out of the actual out of the actual fiscal year. Next February
Correct.
is going to be, we're going to be into the next fiscal year's budget.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Okay. The other one I wanted to bring up, I mentioned it earlier, dumpster services. I'm on page 57. This is the one that I mentioned we are going to exceed. And I've mentioned it before. We budgeted $60,000 on this. Right now, we're at 90, call it 92%. So, I mean, we just, yeah, I mentioned it before. I want the board to be aware of that.
And looking at the numbers, and Mike can kind of probably go over this a little bit more, it seems like it's getting better now as we're going along. Meaning there's less moisture, less water base, or, you know, water. basin.
It's a water-driven issue for
A
late.
little bit, and we changed up a little bit of how we're handling our sludge now.
Okay,
And then last time, obviously, the removal and disposal of the sludge that was in the old stuff that got removed from the old plant, so, old part of the plant.
okay. Thank you. I think that's enough.
Right. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the 2018, back to the top. Go to here. The combined financial variance report. Indicate your vote by raising your hand if you're in favor. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Discussion and possible action regarding joint meeting between Trophy Club Mud District 1 and Trophy Club Town Council. A, meeting date and time, and B, agenda items. Staff?
Mr. President, we have had some discussion with Manager Tom Class of the town regarding the date and time for that meeting. What he is suggesting is that we hold that joint meeting, which is called out in our fire contract, on the 24th of July, which is a Tuesday, and that we hold it here so that all of the town council folk and our own board members can fit around the dais. Apparently, the town hall does not have enough chairs to support that big of a cabal. You know, they've asked that we hold that here. That would be the regularly scheduled town council meeting. And so the suggestion from Manager Class was that they hold their regular meeting starting at 7 and that the joint meeting start at 8. The contract calls for us to be able to, say, well, we're okay with the date, but we like to change the order, or to, to respond in a different way. The second option, if the 24th date was not good for our board, was to have the joint meeting at our regularly scheduled meeting on the 16th of July. If I got the date right, I think it's the 16th of July. Maybe it's the 18th.
It is the 16th.
Okay. I felt like there wouldn't be any real problem with doing it on the 24th. But, it's one of those things. I talked to Director Flynn, and he had a conflict with Tuesdays. It's only one Tuesday a month, right?
I'm fine with that. Fine with that date.
So you're good with that date. And I said, sure, I don't see any problem with having that meeting here. There's no problem with that. With respect to the agenda items for that meeting, there's the obvious one that's called out in the contract. The other items that would be on the agenda are really open to negotiation between the council and the town, the mud board and the town council. And Tom and I can work on that. I think ultimately the attorneys have to sign off on the agenda. So these are the things that have been asked for by the town.
Does that date work for everyone,
24th?
the 24th?
I think I should be back from Michigan by then.
From Michigan, or?
May not work for councils.
It may not work for me, but I don't think I've been to this meeting in prior years, so.
Normally, this meeting was primarily just going through the fire budget. And so there really wasn't a need for you to come to this meeting. I guess probably, from my perspective, when it comes to considering take appropriate action regarding, and let me know, can we talk about, when we talk about the agenda? In my view, on the item, the goal is not to try to solve this. My goal is to direct, what I think we should do with this is direct town manager Class and general manager Carmen to negotiate and bring something back. My goal would not to be sit back and argue, have 11 people arguing over what we should do with the facilities. I don't think there's any value in that, and actually it's a big waste of time. We'll probably be there to 8 o'clock the next morning, going back and forth on everyone's view of what we think ought to happen. And so I guess, from me, if that's the board's position, that everyone is of that mindset, that that's what our recommendation is going to be, then I'm comfortable with that. If the goal is to sit back and try to litigate that, to steal a Tony term, with 11 people, then I really have no interest or desire to sit there and spend that time doing that. Kind of thoughts?
I agree with you. I'm not.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't have a problem meeting with the town to discuss it.
And is the maintenance building the old police in the back?
No.
Which one's
It's-
maintenance?
It's the wastewater treatment plant. There's a building that we constructed, and we were splitting. It's sitting right in front of the wastewater treatment plant. We built it, and we were going to, we were sharing it as shared storage space. Eventually, for whatever reason, we stopped using it, so I think they're using 100% of it. And
Okay.
so,
I tell you what, I do have a question on this, and it's a legal question. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question, and I will let the attorney say whether he would like to go into executive session to discuss it or not. My question is, having had the presentation at the workshop and the ability to decrease the size of the MUD's footprint due to outstanding bond obligations, can we sell any land?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. You certainly could not.
Can I decrease the MUD's footprint by selling some land that the MUD owns?
If this answers your question, conveying property doesn't change the district's boundaries. Conveying property just changes ownership, but it doesn't change the corporate boundaries of the district.
Okay, okay,
If that's your question.
that, you answered my question. Thank you.
Now, just remind the board, this item relates to agenda items and meeting dates with a joint meeting with the town. So if we're going to substantially discuss it, I assume that's going to be pursuant to 14A.
I don't have any other discussions for it.
I think we're trying to get the date set. There's still time to go back and forth with getting the agenda so it makes both our board and the town council happy.
So is everyone comfortable with the date and the
Yes.
agenda items as presented?
I do have one question. Is this in lieu of our regular meeting, or are we going to have that meeting and this one? 2 meetings.
We anticipate having, this one's called out in the contract we have with the town to manage the fire service. We're on the hook for the capital expenses and half of the O&M expenses. per the contract. You know, all the assets of the fire department still belong to the MUD, the fire truck, the building, all of those items, and any capital expenditures they're gonna make.
Addition.
In addition, yeah, that's, okay, I just
So, and
know
on,
which
Yeah,
way, which
yeah.
way we're,
Yeah.
on the meeting in the 16th, just as a final note, our regularly scheduled board meeting, we had talked about doing a separate workshop so that the fire chief could present his mission and vision for the fire department, which has, what's the word? It has subsequent budgetary impacts because he intends to raise the level of service provided by the fire department. And we have expenses that come along with that, but he's not had an opportunity to address our board and explain his vision for the fire department going forward. So rather than do a separate session, we agreed to have him on the agenda first on the 16th to talk about his mission and vision. So just a presentation to our board. I told him he had to keep it to 30 minutes. And then Stephen will add in the additional piece of that, which is the tax revenue. I can tell you that we've looked at their preliminary expenditure budget. It's somewhere between 25 and 30% increase year over year, which has the potential to generate a tax increase for the fire tax. But we don't know that yet. I mean, we still have to make a projection, and ultimately it will be a projection. But on that meeting on the 16th, we'll let Chief Carroll present to our board his mission and vision. And then he'll talk about his expenditure budget at a high level. And then we'll try to amend it with our part of the funding stream, because that's the one piece he doesn't really have.
Okay. Any other questions here? Do we need, is there anything per se to approve here?
I think if you just directed the staff to let the town know that we've approved the date for the 24th, and to, you know, after we go into closed session, talk about what we want to have on that agenda. Give me marching orders to talk about that with Tom Class.
Okay, well, I'd say direction, we're comfortable with that July 24th date, and I guess the tentative agenda for, and the tentative agenda. If we're good there. 11, consider and take appropriate action regarding director workshop meeting.
Yeah, I asked to put this on the agenda. I voiced my concerns, maybe not the right word, but I'll use that word, that having 2 hours today to talk about a lot of the issues that are facing us as a MUD board, while a noble first step was just that. I think there's so many items out there, especially, again, I'll go back, play the newbie card one more time, that's out there that we're just not going to be able to sufficiently talk about at length these issues. And I just wrote down a few of them. We talked about the budget being the biggest one, the upcoming budget. I mean, we've got the wastewater plant, you know, completion, budget overrun. That's a big issue. We've never really talked about that, the implications of that. The Fort Worth project. I mean, Carmen, you have a list this long. So my suggestion is that we have an outside meeting of some sort with the board, not necessarily tied into our direct MUD meeting, but a Saturday, something, being sensitive to the fact that people work and people have got families. I just think there's so much coming at us that I'm concerned that we won't have the time to address them sufficiently, any of the issues. So I'd like to propose that we look at a potential date for this board to get together, and we can come up with an agenda item, working with Carmen and the board, to specifically talk about the items, but specifically the budget, first and foremost. I think it's needed.
So I guess my question to you would be, are you advocating one meeting, or are you talking about doing multiple meetings?
I guess I'm advocating one meeting to begin with, and we can see where it goes from there. I'm not advocating we have one every quarter. I think having one meeting where we have 5 or 6 hours to kind of do what we just did tonight in a lot more detail certainly would get us a lot further along from understanding, again, certainly the new people, the issues that are facing this board that are critical. And we've got some big ones. I mean, I know maybe a little bit more just because of the financials and meeting with Stephen and Carmen and Bill. There's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, it scares me that things that are in front of us that I don't feel comfortable having a very good working knowledge of. So to answer your question, Greg, I'd say an initial meeting is, I think, sufficient unless we get to the end of that and say, we didn't cover it all.
Yeah, and I think that's likely to be the scenario, and I'm very sensitive of times. I know for me, I've been traveling the last 4 weekends, and I think there's just something that you just learn, some of it. Let me say this, I am all for doing things to get the board up to speed. I absolutely am. I think, but there's also a piece that, that's just time on the board. Nothing's going to replace that, and working with the GM and others to kind of get up to speed. I know for me, weekends to do a weekend would be fine. If we get there and say, okay, well, let's look at doing another one, that becomes problematic for me. And I also think if the 6 hours, as much as I enjoy hearing Tony's voice, to sit there and listen to him talk for 6 hours on a variety of topics, I think.
Well, I'm not even talking about time, I'm talking about the issues that just look at the budget. How long could we spend just talking about the budget, just that subject alone? That's easily a couple-hour subject, right?
And that's my point. I think when you look at all of the items there are, you would rapidly exceed, 3 or 4 hours. If depending on what level of detail you went through the budget.
Well, then maybe the idea is you get 4 hours, as a suggestion. Figure out what can we cover, what are the top 2 or 3 things that this group absolutely positively has to talk about in 4 hours, and prioritize them. 1 to whatever, and if you don't get to item 6, you don't get to item 6. And it doesn't have to be a Saturday, I threw that out there, it could be another day, another, weeknight. I just think spending time on these issues is needed, at least in my view.
I obviously concur. Even if you take a look at what was proposed here on the joint session agenda, do you walk into a meeting with another body not knowing where you as a body stand?
Well, my hope is that we will.
Yeah, but there are a lot of issues that in a workshop setting, and no offense to Tony, I'm not sure that, because we've had a legal briefing, I don't know that you need to be here.
If it's budget type, I would say absolutely not. If
Yeah.
you want legal advice regarding some of the other ones, you may. It's entirely to me.
In worst case, we can give you a call.
Sure.
Yeah, and kill the hours on the road. But I concur, and, just overview where we're at, guidance, budget guidance, what are the big items? How do we want to go with the budget? And I look at it saying, this is a short-term item. This is not something that we put off to August or September to do. This is, in my mind, a short-term thing.
No, I mean, if we're gonna talk about budget, that needs to be something pretty quick, because we're gonna be having budget conversations pretty quick.
We also, walking a fine line, you gotta watch, the Open Meetings Act and that stuff, that we don't come to some kind of consensus during the meeting, or,
Well, that means a vote.
well,
Yeah.
We can have our discussion. We just
as
can't
long
vote.
as it's a transfer of information and no,
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we just have to be careful about agenda. I think if we're talking budget, we're probably fine. I honestly think if we're getting into strategies related to some of these other negotiations with the town, I think that's gonna be a lot more, it's gonna have more of a legal tint, and potentially, because we could throw out something and have it not pass legal muster, and then spend an hour talking about something, come to agreement, and then have them say, "Ah, you can't do that." And
Yeah,
so-
but I mean, even a 15-minute overview of what the subject is all about. I mean, I can read what it's all about, but I mean, hey, let me give you a little background here. How did we get here? Carmen could fill us in. We've got this property, we've got that property. There are some things that we could spend a little bit of time educating us and leave it at that.
Yeah, no, we're gonna do that tonight. So that's a executive, that's item on 14, where we're gonna discuss the item and kind of get a perspective. So I guess, I'm not opposed to it, but we also have meetings where we can flush some of this stuff out during our designated meeting times. So, but I mean, I would really encourage, if there are 3 or 4 things where the new directors see real value in spending some time discussing, I absolutely think we should definitely do that. The only thing that I want to caution against, the idea of saying, well, we'll meet, and if we don't get it done, then let's set up another meeting. If we don't get it done,
Fair
set
enough.
up another
No.
meeting, that becomes problematic.
Fair enough.
Just to make sure we're above clear, we could call it a special meeting and actually publish it.
No, yeah, and I guess the concern is, even if we did the workshop, we have to declare it. And so that piece, I guess from my perspective, isn't really an issue. It's just, it becomes a matter of time. And encroaching in on personal time in the summers when people travel and do other things, so. So I guess,
Mr. President, Steve and I had this discussion in my office, I guess, a few weeks back. And so there's a general premise of like, what's MUD 101, right? Let's just go through blocking and tackling. How do we get water from Fort Worth? What are the 7 bullet points from that contract? It's a big chunk of our expenditures. What's in our water and wastewater master plans? They're different documents, and they're in different states of completion. You know, going through those kind of things, then talking about mission and vision, like the fire chief wants to do. For me, that's a little bit vaunted, if you will. I mean, the traditional mission, vision, goals thing. But I look at certain things that I want to push forward, which include getting our system into a GIS system and tying it to a maintenance management system in a systematic way, represent future capital expenditures. And so to some extent, having an opportunity to express the vision for that, which is going to have budgetary implications, is an important part of that workshop. Now, as I've looked at weekend dates, I find that there's probably 4 key staff members that need to be there. They're here in the room. And we've got a lot of vacation already scheduled for this summer. So when we're going to do it is another matter. Is it something we can knock off on a weekday night so that we don't interfere with folks that work? Is it something we need to go to a Saturday with? I'm available at either one at my hourly rate. So, just saying.
so I guess there's no,
That was gonna come
I'm
back.
not talking to you on the phone when you're driving home. That was a decision that happened earlier.
does that count if you're reading a letter from me?
I think, yeah.
Discounted
Now,
rate.
if I'm reading it while I'm driving, I'm in trouble.
No kidding.
And he's like an attorney, bills in quarter-hour increments. So I mean, it's like, yeah. So
And
no,
so-
I don't have a problem doing it on a weeknight, so long as I walk in the door and know I'm not gonna be here, let's say, because staff's gotta come to work the next morning. Out the door at 9 or out the door at 10, period. Hard number.
Yeah.
We'll come in and we'll talk, and even if I have to do it a couple times in a week, I'll survive.
Yeah, that's, for me, that would be problematic.
Yeah, I understand. It's written on your back.
Hey,
Problematic.
guys, I say let's walk before we run. I'm not trying to reinvent everything here.
Yeah.
Let's take a 4-hour window on a date that we all can agree on. If not a weekend, I'm not buying or selling that. Let's look at
Yeah.
our calendars and say, can we pick this Thursday from 5 to 9, and that's it. That's all we've got. We're not going till 10 or 11 or
Yeah.
see where it gets us.
Yeah, I can't make 5.
Well, that was an example. Could
Yeah.
be,
What can you make? What's your number?
6 would be the earliest, because I'm
Okay.
traveling back from
I'm good.
Dallas.
Likewise. But, yeah,
Unlike him, just going the opposite direction.
yeah. I know just generically for me, Wednesdays, I have Bible study. So Wednesdays for me are typically out. I guess, Tony, I know there's certain days that work. I know third Tuesdays doesn't work for Steve. Are there certain days that, I guess a lot of it, to be honest with you, I think we need a agenda before we start talking dates, because I think a lot of that determines who really needs to be there. If we're talking just mud vision or budget, then,
You may not be here.
well, no, not me not be here. I think certain staff members, they become optional. And so I think we have to have an idea of what we're going to discuss before we meet, because that will really determine, because I think if we get into,
I think you set the meeting date, and the schedule will take care of itself within it. You
Well,
pick, you
but you-
pick the date,
But if even
a
if,
day, but if people aren't available that need to be there,
this man can work the agenda. He's capable. He can say, look, okay, we're gonna meet then, and okay, this is the date that works, and I'm gonna cover it myself, and therefore I'm not gonna have this staff person to back me up, but I'm a big boy, I can handle it.
hey, if you,
So do you want to pick a date, or you want me to send one out with a draft agenda?
I think we should look at a date.
Judge, I think we just.
Because if we don't do that, then we're gonna go around 52 times about a date. We might as
Yeah,
well
no, let's-
try to pick a date.
yeah, what dates work for,
So I think we need to move into July. So what's the early July?
Kelly, can you make the 4th?
No.
No, Kelly can't make the 4th.
Probably the second week of July, maybe
You
on a
could send out an email, we can send back an availability, because I don't have a July calendar on me.
You open your,
Yeah, no, that's okay, it doesn't have my,
yeah, it doesn't have his calendar.
doesn't have my,
that's agenda week, I'm gonna struggle with that. Make it work.
Tuesday, July 10th would work. It's really just budget, so, Lori needs to be available to keep minimal minutes because it's a workshop. I think she told me it's not technically required that we record it, although we've had a history of doing that.
Well, unfortunately, this is my genius idea, and I'm out all that week, so,
All right.
I mean, almost any other time, the next week of the 16th, the week of the 23rd,
That's our meeting week would be the 16th.
right?
Once we,
The 18th, we have staff, a lot of staff out.
once we get into July 24, I think Mike is out, if I'm remembering correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, 24th is,
How about the
We
9th?
did it before the joint meeting on the 24th of July.
What-
Before it, in the
Yeah.
afternoon?
What does the 9th look like? Is that a possibility?
You would need to take off time, wouldn't you? We're doing it during the day.
No,
No, I'm talking about at night. I'm talking about Monday night, the 9th.
I know, but Kelly was
Oh.
talking about before the meeting on the
Oh,
24th.
oh.
But that would put it during the afternoon.
Yeah.
I think Mark might have to work. So you said Monday, the 9th?
As a suggestion. I mean, I'm out that week from the 10th on, but the 9th,
Monday night's fine with me.
I think I'm out the 20th, 21st, and 22nd. Maybe the 23rd.
what does yours look like, Greg, on the 9th? Is that a possibility?
I don't see anything on the calendar on the night. So we're talking like a 6 to 10?
Yep.
So why don't you make a tentative motion to, or to direct me to send out a meeting request with a draft agenda for that?
Do we even need a motion to do that, compared to just directing staff to do it? I don't think,
I think the discussion's got it there.
yeah,
Unless
I'd
you
say,
want-
yeah. Send out one, and everyone can go home and do a last-minute check on their calendar to make sure that it works. But we'll tentatively plan for that date, the 9th, from 6 to 10. Is that something that, will Corbett one be available for you to come in?
I don't,
Okay.
I don't,
Okay.
I don't,
Based on what
honestly
we're
don't
talking
think it
about,
would
I'm
be-
not sure that would be,
if we have a question
Yeah.
for you, we can either delay it. Yeah. Delay
Okay,
Okay.
that's item 11. Reports and updates.
Mr. President, in your packet, I've included a general manager's monthly report, and then there's several other updates from water, wastewater, and finance separately in that package that I don't cover in my document. But I would draw your attention to the first time that the fire department summary has been included in the general manager report. As I was discussing with Chief Carroll, the fact that, well, we are on the hook for half of their budget, and there's really little communication coming back from the fire department, just because they're managed through the town, which is fine. But he said, no problem, I'm preparing weekly updates for the town. And I asked him to just send me over a paragraph or two, and I've included those for your perusal. If you don't want to see them, let me know.
What
That's
page is
fine.
that?
I actually don't have it.
140.
140?
I have a question on the high-service booster pump.
What page is that?
It's on page 138. I guess I'll be kind. When do we start the project? And are we getting close to having the problems fixed? This is the,
This was carried over from last year, so this was put in the budget last year. We bid it, we did carry it over, and I don't remember why.
It was extensively over budget.
yeah, the bids come in over
Bid
budget.
it. Yeah, we bid it this year, and it did come in way, way over budget. So the engineers changed some parameters and everything to try, from the pump, motor and everything, try to get a little bit of that cost down and everything. But honestly, we've been so busy with the wastewater plant, we haven't got back to it yet. So our goal is to, now that we're in the summer months, is to hopefully go out to bid again, maybe late August, early September, to try to get it rolling
Is this,
in this fiscal year, but it'll probably overrun into next fiscal year.
is this replacement of the first one of the three?
Yes.
And we approved money for the second one as well.
No. We've only approved this one. We haven't approved the second one.
We did one for each year, didn't we? That was the goal.
Oh,
Well,
the goal
that
was
was-
to
The
do
goal
one-
was to do
That
one
was our
for,
goal, but we haven't made it through the first one yet.
is it possible to, maybe we might want to consider looking at bidding out both of them, because I think the goal always was to replace them all in 3 consecutive years, and
I believe there'll be different designs, won't they? I mean, ultimately, they're not all the same pumps for one set.
The three that are down there right now, the older ones are all the same ones. So this is gonna be our last VFD. The last two will just be some straight line pumps. So they won't be as expensive as a VFD.
So wait, you're saying the other 2 VFDs have been replaced or installed?
We've got 2 VFDs down there now. This will be the third.
yeah, so there's 5 total. There's 2 VFDs and there's 3 that's fixed, and our goal was to do a variable one each year till we replaced the 3 that were fixed. And so I thought this past fiscal year,
What I'm hearing, though, from the way Mike's saying, is it will still always have 2 fixed.
We'll have 2 fixed pumps. So this will be the last VFD we put in. The last 2 replacements will just be a higher horsepower pump. That'll be a straight line. So they'll kick on. We can adjust our flow with the VFDs.
that's something new. So I thought the goal
I'm
always
sure that
was
was
to.
in the water study. Like, we were gonna replace one every year, but we were only gonna put 1 VFD, and then the rest were gonna be straight line.
Okay, I had VFDs in mind also.
Yeah, that's new to me.
You guys just haven't looked at the study in a while.
Yeah.
I think that we're upgrading
No,
the
he actually
150s to
he referenced the study in an email to me like last week.
200 horsepowers, but
Be-
really,
Bill
I mean, really,
reads-
honestly, there's no other excuse than just the wastewater plant's taking up so much time. We just
Okay.
haven't put that in the forefront yet. And now it's summertime, so I told them, don't do it. So that's also gonna affect something else that I had in capital. I had to fix one of the bulkheads on the pumps down there, replace that, but I was gonna wait till we did the VFD, pull it out, get it redone. So That might be some more cost savings, depends how we're not doing the VFD.
Sometimes I get the impression I'm trying to push a Model T around the block and it just won't quite run.
It's because you still get a hand crank it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Anything else, General Manager Carmen? Staff? Okay. Do we need to go in executive session?
Yes.
Okay, pursuant to section 551-071 of the Texas Open Meeting Act, the board may consult with this attorney in executive session on a matter which the duty of the attorney to the governmental body under the disciplinary rules of professional conduct of the State Bar of Texas clearly conflicts with the Open Meeting Acts to seek the advice of counsel on legal matters involving pending or contemplated litigation or settlement offers. A, contractor breach, performance, and payment issues related to district's contract with Weber Cadagua Partners for construction of the wastewater treatment plant. And item number 2, the Trophy Club Municipal District Number 1 versus Acadia Services LLC in the District Court of Tarrant County, District Court 141, cause number 141-299-351-18. Pursuant to section 552072 of the Texas Open Meeting Act, the board may deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, value of real estate of real property if deliberation in an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the disposition of the governmental body in negotiations with a third party. Item A, district real property located at 100 Municipal Drive and 1501 Junction Way. We are going to, okay, Trophy Club Mud 1, we're going to return to regular session. It is 10:58. Consider and take appropriate action on matters deliberated in executive session.
And you should announce that no final decisions, actions, or votes were taken.
Yeah, no final decisions or votes were taken during executive session.
Okay, I'll try to wax eloquently. I move that the general manager is directed to enter into discussion with the town manager concerning the annex building, the maintenance building, and the police building. As well as the real property located at 100 Municipal Drive and 1501 Junction Way, also known as.
We have a motion by Vice President Rose to direct the general manager to engage town manager class on negotiations for district real property located at 100 Municipal Drive and 1501 Junction Way. Do I have a second?
I second.
Second by Director Castaway. Any discussions? Hearing none, all in favor indicate by raising your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 16, items for future agendas. I think we have the public presentations policy.
Coming back.
That one's coming back. Was there anything else that need to come back? Okay. Set future meeting dates. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 16th at 6:30, and we have a budget workshop tentatively scheduled for July the 9th from 6 to 10, and then we have a joint meeting tentatively scheduled for July 24th with the town at 8 p.m. One of the things we may want to think about, because I have a real fear that the town is going to run long, since we're going to direct the general manager to do it, have our meeting before theirs, so go 6 to 7 rather than 7, rather than going 8 on, because if they run over, we're going to be stuck sitting there. So I would recommend doing ours at 6 and going 6 to 7, so we have a hard stop.
I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether hard stop's desirable, but I would say start at 6.
Well, there's motivation.
I have been on the wrong side of a hard stop one time that I will never forget.
In fairness, I think both the board and the council have to agree on the agenda and the start times, but
Okay.
I will certainly take that back to manager class and tell him that we'd prefer to do ours before rather than after. And then, of course, we'll be here in our room, we can record it, and if their meeting goes long, we can record that too, and provide them with videotape for their website.
Okay. Is there anything else?
Would you like a motion to adjourn?
I'm waiting on
I
you.
move to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. The meeting is adjourned at 11:02 PM.
I seconded it already.
We didn't need a second or a vote.
Good.
That's the reason why we're
Stop
done.
in at,
I'll quote the famous Martin Lawrence, "You don't have to go home, but you gotta get up out of here."
All right, that's,